Black and White, by Liu Jiming, translated by Chen. Part 3, Volume 1, Chapter 4. 1. Why do we have to know each other before we meet? Gu Zheng and Wang Sheng had agreed to meet at Jane Eyre Tsafu. As before, Gu Zheng sat in the booth by the window. Yamao building across the street and the lawn in front of the cafe were exactly as she had seen them last time, like the stage setting of the same play, except that the season had changed from summer to winter, and the green lawn was now withered and yellow, revealing the brown soil underneath. The waitress's short green skirt had been replaced with a long skirt with rolled edges, and the wide-brimmed soft hat was also gone. Her dyed brown hair was tied into a bun on top of her head, like a pagoda. Gu Zheng had seen this classical style in some oil paintings before, but she couldn't remember it for a moment, or she didn't have the mood to think too much about it. She held the soda water the waitress had brought and took a sip. It was icy cold. The weather was really too cold. She had added a sweater when she left the house, but she still couldn't resist the biting wind. Maybe I should add some hot water, Gu Zheng thought, gazing at the gloomy sky outside the French windows. She rolled up the sleeves of her sweater and looked at the watch on her wrist. There were still more than 10 minutes until the agreed time. She suddenly realized that perhaps she shouldn't have arrived so long before Wang Sheng, or rather, as a man, Wang Sheng should have arrived before her. But why was she quibbling over these things? Was she on a blind date with a man? This suddenly emerging thought made Gu Zheng's face blush involuntarily. The reason why she wanted to see Wang Sheng so urgently was, of course, because he was the poster on Tianya.com. Wang Sheng and her brother Zhong Tianyi were friends for many years, and perhaps all the secrets of her brother's life and death could be found in Wang Sheng, including that letter of accusation. Whether as Zhong Tianyi's sister or as a lawyer, this was full of temptation for Gu Zheng. Since graduating from Dongjiang University, Gu Zheng and Wang Sheng had had no contact, and she knew nothing about his situation. She couldn't even remember what he looked like. She only remembered that one of his eyes had a single eyelid and the other had a double eyelid. Of course, there was also that photographer who was inseparable from him. As soon as the name Du Wei popped into Gu Zheng's head, she couldn't help but frown, feeling nauseous, as if she had accidentally swallowed a fly. But this feeling of nausea was quickly replaced by her unique sensitivity and curiosity as a lawyer. Wang Sheng was the deputy editor-in-chief of Popular Art, Du Wei was the chairman of Popular Art Media Group, and Master Wu was Du Wei's godfather. Their relationship with her brother Zhong Tianyi was very close. Could some little-known secrets be hidden here? It was this curiosity that prompted Gu Zheng to find Wang Sheng's phone number and ask him to meet. At that time, she didn't think of anything else. The indoor heating was very strong. Gu Zheng took off her snowflake wool coat and saw a man wearing a black leather jacket walking across the withered yellow lawn towards the cafe. Although they hadn't seen each other for more than 10 years, Gu Zheng recognized him at a glance from that slightly disheveled hair. It was Wang Sheng. Wang Sheng walked into the cafe and looked around, his gaze stopping on Gu Zheng. After a moment, he walked towards her. Coming closer, the two people's eyes met. Gu Zheng saw those familiar and special eyes. One single eyelid, one double eyelid. Gu Zheng, hello. Hello, Wang Sheng. They greeted each other, their expressions calm, their tones bland, as if they hadn't been separated for more than 10 years, but had just met yesterday. They didn't even shake hands. What would you like to drink? Gu Zheng asked after Wang Sheng sat down opposite her in the booth. Anything, Wang Sheng had just said when he realized that this answer was inappropriate, so he added, tea, maybe. Then he turned his face to the waitress. What kind of tea do you have? Longjing pu'er, dahong pao. The waitress read from the menu in her hand, but Wang Sheng stopped her. Give me a cup of pu'er, and you? The latter sentence was asking Gu Zheng. Obviously, he had successfully turned from guest to host from that moment on. Cappuccino, Gu Zheng replied. She always drank this whenever she came to Jane Eyre Tsafu. At the same time, she gave Wang Sheng's coup a knowing smile and thought, "He is quite a gentleman. I'm a regular here. Their cappuccino is very authentic," she said. Before the coffee and tea arrived, Gu Zheng and Wang Sheng obviously didn't want to get to the main topic, so in the following period of time, the two people's conversation seemed a little unconstrained. "Were you surprised to receive my call?" "Yes, a little. You didn't know that I was working in Dajiang after graduation, did you?" "I know. I heard it from your brother. The two of us have been in the same city for over 10 years but haven't met even once. It's a bit incredible." "Yes, it's incredible. I remember when I first went to college, my brother told you and Du Wei to take good care of me." I'm ashamed. Wang Sheng lowered his head embarrassedly, but then raised his head again. "By the way, do you know that Du Wei is my boss now?" "Of course I know," Gu Zheng smiled slightly sarcastically. "I also know that Master Wu is Du Wei's godfather." As soon as Gu Zheng mentioned the 3 words, Master Wu, Wang Sheng's face changed suddenly, and he lowered his head again. Gu Zheng realized that the conversation should turn to the main topic. At this moment, the waitress brought the tea and coffee. Gu Zheng looked at the steaming cappuccino before her and gently stirred the foam in the cup with a spoon. After a moment of silence, she asked, "I heard that they are going to sue you." "I know. I just received a summons from the court," Wang Sheng said lightly, that calm tone as if he was talking about something unrelated to himself. Gu Zheng emphasized her tone and said, "This is just a dispute over the right of reputation, but they are filing a case with criminal self-prosecution, and they have hired our law firm director to act as their agent. Do you know what you are facing?" "I don't know." Wang Sheng looked at Gu Zheng blankly, shook his head, and smiled wryly. "I've never been in a lawsuit before." Wang Sheng's pair of blank eyes made Gu Zheng's heart suddenly sink like a stone was pressing on it. In these years, she had represented countless cases, criminal and civil, and had also come into contact with all kinds of clients. But this was the first time she had met someone like Wang Sheng, who was blank about his own case. These weren't the eyes an adult should have, but like a child's, ignorant, innocent, fearless. Gradually, Gu Zheng superimposed the somewhat unfamiliar man in front of her, along with the bookish Chinese department graduate student, in her memory. The blank space and separation formed by more than 10 years gradually disappeared, and a feeling of pity and cherish arose in her heart. Maybe I should help him, Gu Zheng thought. A thought suddenly popped into her head. I want to represent him in this case. Thinking this way, she blurted out a sentence. "You haven't hired a lawyer yet, have you? How about I represent you?" Hearing Gu Zheng's words, Wang Sheng was stunned at first, then nodded repeatedly. "That would be great. I don't know where to hire a lawyer." Gu Zheng knew that the reason she was doing this was all because of her brother Zhong Tianyi. Looking at Wang Sheng's familiar yet unfamiliar face, she felt a trance. 2. More than just a mistake. Gu Zheng soon realized that she might have made a serious mistake after parting ways with Wang Sheng at Jane Eyre Tsafu. Wu Bozhong had officially hired Huang Zupeng as his attorney. Wouldn't defending Wang Sheng mean going against her own boss? Back at the law firm, Gu Zheng shut herself in her office and searched for information about Du Wei and Master Wu online. On Baidu Baike, Du Wei had a long list of dazzling titles: Chairman of Popular Art Mudia Group, Vitsu, Chairman of Dongjiang Provincial Federation of Literary and Art Circles, Chairman of Dongjiang Provincial Photographers Association, Famous Photographer, Deputy to the Dongjiang Provincial People's Congress, Top 10 Young Entrepreneurs of Dongjiang Province, Model Worker of Dongjiang Province, Cultural Celebrity of Dongjiang Province, and so on. Master Wu also had many titles: Founder of Zhonghua Yuanji Gong, President of Zhonghua Yuanji Culture Research Association, 58th generation descendant of Empress Wu Zutian, member of the Dajiang Municipal People's Political Consultative Conference, standing committee member of the Niangzihu District People's Political Consultative Conference, and so on. In addition to this, Gu Zheng also saw the name Song Changkun, a former leader of Dongjiang Province, on the list of members of the board of directors of Popular Art magazine published on the Popular Art Media Group website. Song Qiangkun was the honorary chairman of the board, and Du Wei was the chairman. Gu Zheng was no stranger to Song Qiangkun. Song Xiaofan, a female writer whom she met while studying at Dongda, was Song Qiangkun's daughter. Du Wei and Song Xiaofan had a very close relationship at Dongda, and Song Xiaofan had even written the preface to Du Wei's collection of photographic works. Gu Zheng certainly knew what this meant. Her heart was pounding and she was sweating profusely. She felt as if she had accidentally stepped on a landmine. She instinctively wanted to shrink back, but when she thought of Wang Sheng's blank and helpless eyes, she couldn't bear it. Moreover, what really prompted her to take on this case wasn't entirely out of sympathy for Wang Sheng, but to explore what role her brother Zhang Tianyi had played in it. Was that letter of accusation written by Wang Sheng pretending to be her brother? Or did her brother really write it? Or, as Master Wu claimed, was it purely fabricated and slanderous? Anything was possible, and taking the job as Wang Sheng's attorney might be a good shortcut to understanding the truth. This thought wound around Gu Zheng like water plants, lingering in her mind. She felt nervous and excited, as if watching a thrilling American blockbuster. That day, Gu Zheng stayed in her office very late. When the intern Xiao Kong knocked on her door to remind her that it was past closing time, she woke up as if from a dream. At this time, the law firm was empty except for her. Gu Zheng walked to the street. It was late and the city lights were on, but the traffic on the road was sparse. Gu Zheng waited at the bus stop for a while, but the bus didn't come. She stepped forward and walked. There were few pedestrians on the sidewalk, making it seem somewhat empty. Gu Zheng heard her footsteps like drumbeats, rhythmic and very clear. She looked at the murky and distant night sky above her head, illuminated by the city lights, and her heart was as still as water. The images of her brother Zhang Tianyi and Wang Sheng alternated in her mind. She thought, I wouldn't back down. Now that I've started, I can only move forward without turning back, even if there's an invisible abyss ahead. Gu Zheng fully devoted herself to preparing for the court hearing the next day. First, she met with Wang Sheng, and then she went to the South Lake District Court to review the complaint and case file. The presiding judge of this case in Criminal Division 2 was Liu Jiming, who was recently promoted. Gu Zheng had originally planned to meet him. Still, when she thought of the tacit understanding between Liu Jiming and Huang Zupeng at Hongding Dulao last time, she gave up the idea and left after getting the complaint from the judicial assistant. Gu Zheng didn't go to the law firm in the following days. She locked herself in that small apartment and carefully studied the complaint and case file. Gu Zheng had represented defamation cases more than once before, but they were all civil cases. This was the first time she had encountered a civil case filed as a criminal self-prosecution. Gu Zheng felt that even if the content of the letter of accusation were untrue, it would be difficult to constitute the crime of defamation as claimed in the criminal self-prosecution case, even if it was determined that the defendant had infringed on the plaintiff's right of reputation. The reason why the defendant prosecuted the civil dispute as a criminal case was obviously out of a strong desire for revenge, wanting to put Wang Sheng to death. What Gu Zheng was curious about was whether it was Wu Bozhong's own idea to prosecute the civil case as a criminal case, or whether it came from his powerful adopted son, Du Wei, and the lawyer Huang Zupeng. Was their purpose only revenge, or were there other purposes? But in any case, this was a powerful pressure, and even a threat to Wang Sheng. If it were a civil case, even if he lost, it would only be a public apology and economic compensation. But if the crime of defamation were established, he would face 1 to 3 years in prison. For Wang Sheng, this would undoubtedly be a devastating blow. Moreover, judging from the case itself, it was quite unfavorable to Wang Sheng. Although Wang Sheng provided Gu Zheng with the original letter of accusation that Zhang Tianyi had sent him, it was impossible to prove the truth of the claim in the letter of accusation that Master Wu and Zhang Tianyi's wife, Meng Fei, had committed adultery. Also, the complaint stated that the 1 million yuan that Zhang Tianyi provided to Master Wu was a sponsorship, not an investment, as stated in the letter of accusation. Since Zhong Tianyi died, the defendant could not produce evidence to refute this. In this way, the allegations against Master Wu in the letter of accusation became baseless and difficult to establish. As a lawyer, Gu Zheng felt that the only thing she could do was to argue for a reduction in Wang Sheng's infringing circumstances and ask the court to change the criminal case to a civil case, because after all, Wang Sheng did not write that letter of accusation, he only posted it on the internet on his behalf. But this would be equivalent to admitting that her brother Zhong Tianyi's letter of accusation was fabricated, making him a de facto law violator. This would undoubtedly humiliate her brother's spirit in heaven, Gu Zheng thought, adding another layer of unease to her heart. But even so, she didn't have much confidence because the defendant she was facing was not an ordinary person, and the opposing lawyer was not an ordinary lawyer either, but her boss, the well-known Huang Zupeng in the Dongjiang legal community, plus Liu Jiming, who had just been promoted to the presiding judge. Thinking of this, Gu Zheng's heart felt heavy, sinking as if it were tied to a large stone. Suddenly, there was a knock on the door. Gu Zheng didn't have many social interactions, and it was rare for someone to come to her residence. Who could it be? Gu Zheng wondered as she went to open the door. It was Ling Shu. It wasn't her first time coming. Among the colleagues at the law firm, only Ling Shu had been to Gu Zheng's residence. After graduating, she hadn't bought a house yet, and the home she rented was not far from here. She had nowhere else to go on holidays, so she occasionally came to find Gu Zheng to play. Gu Zheng rarely entertained friends at her residence, but Ling Shui was an exception. Indeed, the two of them both loved poetry, and they weren't afraid of running out of things to say when they were together. But since the dinner at Hongding Dulao last time, Gu Zheng hadn't seen Ling Shui again. Seeing her suddenly come to her door now, she was slightly surprised. "Why are you here?" Gu Zheng blocked the doorway, seemingly not wanting to let her in. But Ling Shu walked into the house as if it were her own, looking around as if she suspected that Gu Zheng was hiding someone in the house. "Sister Gu, I haven't seen you at the office for the past few days, and you haven't turned on your phone either. What are you doing hiding at home so mysteriously?" Only then did Gu Zheng realize that she had turned off her phone for the past 2 days to avoid being disturbed. "Oh, I'm busy with a case." "Is it Master Wu's case?" Gu Zheng nodded. "Oh my God, so it's true. I heard that you would defend that under the Bodhi tree, but I didn't believe it." Ling Shu cried out, her mouth agape in surprise. "Sister Gu, has water gotten into your head? Don't you know that Attorney Huang represents Master Wu's case?" Gu Zheng said, "Of course I know." "Do you also know that Huang Zupeng and Judge Niu have colluded long ago?" "Of course, I know." Gu Zheng mechanically repeated the 4 words she had just said. "Knowing this, you still want to fight a losing battle to represent a case with no chance of winning?" Ling Shu stepped back, looking at Gu Zheng as if she didn't recognize her. "Sister Gu, have you gone crazy?" "I haven't gone crazy. Why would I?" Gu Zheng said softly, looking Ling Shu up and down. "You came to me for this? I haven't seen you since we parted ways at Hongding Dulao last time. You seem to have lost a lot of weight." Hearing these words, Ling Shu's eyes turned red, and she suddenly burst into tears. Her emotional changes were so fast that Gu Zheng couldn't turn her mind around for a moment. She didn't know what had happened and hurriedly asked, "Ling Shu, what's wrong?" I don't want to live anymore." Ling Shu sobbed and said, "Sister Gu, why did you leave me alone at Hongding Dulao that day?" Hearing this, Gu Zheng's heart skipped a beat, realizing something. "Huang Zupeng, what did they do to you?" After repeated questioning, Ling Shu told Gu Zheng what had happened that night. It turned out that after Gu Zheng had left Hongding Dulao early that day, Huang Zupeng led Liu Jiming and Ling Shui to a karaoke hall next door. Eating, singing, and dancing after a meal were always part of Huang Zupeng's treats. The 3 of them sat in a KTV private room for a while. Huang Zupeng sang a song, New Mandarin Duck Butterfly Dream, and then went out on the pretext of making a phone call. Ling Shui had also accompanied Huang Zupeng to such social engagements before. Each time, Huang Zupeng said that it was necessary for work, and he invited leaders and judges from the provincial and municipal courts and various district courts. As a newcomer, she couldn't refuse the law firm director's work arrangements. But in the past, there were always several people in the KTV private room each time, and that day, only she and Liu Jiming were left in the private room, and she was a little nervous. Due to drinking too much wine, she sat on the sofa feeling dizzy. Liu Jiming sat down next to her at some point. "Junior sister, dance with me." Saying that, without waiting for Ling Shui to agree, he grabbed her hand and stood up, dancing in the private room. Liu Jiming was shorter than Ling Shui, but his hands were very strong, holding her tightly, leaning her body forward and his mouth almost touching Ling Shui's neck. "Jun junior sister, you're more understanding than Gu Zhang. If you need senior brother to take care of anything in the future, you can come to me directly." Liu Jiming was panting, opening his thick lips, approaching like a pig eating, and a strong smell of alcohol drilled straight into her nose, choking her and making it difficult to breathe. She endured her disgust and struggled, saying, "Judge Liu, you've had too much to drink. I'll go get you a glass of water." But Liu Jiming's hands were like 200-year-old vines, tightly entangling her, making it impossible for her to move. The more she struggled, the tighter she was held. Later, she was pushed onto the sofa, and Liu Jiming came crashing down on her like a mountain. After listening to Ling Shui's story, Gu Zheng's face was pale, and she couldn't speak for a long time. She had encountered Ling Shui's experience when she first entered the law firm, but had luckily escaped. Looking at Ling Shui's tear-stained face, like a pear blossom in the rain, she felt deep pity and strong anger, and at the same time some guilt for not reminding Ling Shui and also for leaving Hongding Dulao early that day. "Ling Shui, I should have thought of it. I'm sorry," she murmured, and her own eyes couldn't help but turn red. After a long while, Ling Shui's emotions calmed down. She suddenly remembered something and said, "Sister Gu, Huang Zupeng must already know that you are going to defend under the Bodhi tree. These past 2 days, he's been wearing a dark face at the law firm, yelling at everyone he sees. Everyone is avoiding him. You have to be careful that he doesn't find fault with you." Gu Zheng nodded, but her heart was surprisingly calm. 3. Breakup. The next morning, Gu Zheng received a call from Huang Zupeng, asking her to go to the law firm. "Now, immediately. Don't take the bus, take a taxi. The law firm will reimburse you." His tone was very severe, clearly in the calm before the storm. Gu Zheng thought, not feeling nervous, that what was coming would come eventually. She had made all the preparations. When Gu Zheng took a taxi to Junding law firm, working hours weren't yet. There weren't many people at the law firm. Only Xiao Kong, the intern at the front desk, was cleaning. As soon as she saw Gu Zheng, she walked over and said softly, "Director Huang is waiting for you in his office." Her expression seemed a little strange. The door to Huang Zupeng's office was open. Gu Zheng knocked on the door and a cold voice came from inside. "Come in." Chutian Building was one of the tallest office buildings in Dajiang. Junding Law Firm's office was on the 39th floor. Huang Zupeng's office was the largest in the entire law firm, about 40 square meters. A French window was like a screen in a giant movie theater, taking up an entire wall. Standing by the window and looking far into the distance, you could see most of the city. Gu Zheng walked in and saw Huang Zupeng standing in front of that French window, facing the outside as if he was appreciating the scenery outside the window. However, the pollution in Dajiang had been very serious in recent years. As soon as winter came, 9 out of 10 days were smoggy. The entire city was shrouded in smog. What scenery could there be to see? Gu Zheng looked at Huang Zupeng's back and said, "Senior, did you want to see me?" "Don't call me senior." Huang Zupeng suddenly turned around, walked a few steps to the large desk in the middle of the office, stood still, raised a finger, wagged it twice, and said in an aggressive tone, "You'd better tell me first about your representation of that under the Bodhi tree. Did he come to you, or did you actively seek him out?" Okay, director. Gu Zheng changed her address and said, I don't quite understand. Is there any difference between him coming to me and me seeking him out? Of course there's a difference, Huang Zupeng said seriously. I know that under the Bodhi tree and your brother Zong Tianyi were fellow villagers and good friends. You and he knew each other in college. If it were he who actively sought you out, it would be excusable for you to appear in court for him. But if it was you who actively sought him out, the nature of the matter is different. What's the difference like? Gu Zheng pondered Huang Zupeng's words and said, It was me who actively sought him out. I understand. You intentionally want to compete with me. Huang Zupeng's face darkened, and he stared at Gu Zheng as if he didn't recognize her, his gaze like an awl. Why do you want to do this? Du Wei told me you dated under the Bodhi tree in college. Is that the reason? How shameless. How can he talk nonsense like that? Gu Zheng questioned with a flushed face, as if Du Wei were standing before her. Then, is it because of your brother Zong Tianyi? Faced with Huang Zupeng's repeated questioning, Gu Zheng was a little impatient. Director Huang, what exactly do you want to say? But Huang Zupeng didn't answer, but asked in return, Do you know the consequences of your actions? I know, Gu Zheng said frankly. There are only two possible outcomes. Either I lose or win. Do you think you can compete with me with your current strength? Huang Zupeng smiled sarcastically and waved his hand powerfully in the air. The outcome waiting for you isn't two. There's only one, and that is defeat. Gu Zheng sensed an arrogant imperiousness from Huang Zupeng's gesture, but she couldn't help but admit that what he said was the truth. Indeed, no matter which aspect you looked at, she wasn't Huang Zupeng's opponent. She turned her gaze to the bookshelf behind Huang Zupeng. That row of bookshelves took up an entire wall, but only half of it was filled with books. The other half was filled with all kinds of medals and trophies, all of which showed Huang Zupeng's identity and status in the legal profession. But Gu Zheng also knew how he had obtained those honorary titles. For example, the top 10 lawyers in the country selection was organized by a legal website, and it took the form of online voting. At that time, Gu Zheng had just joined Junding Law Firm. To be selected as one of the top 10 lawyers in the country, Huang Zupeng called on all the lawyers in the firm, including her, to participate in the voting. The voting time was for a continuous month. According to the voting rules, each person could vote repeatedly. During that time, the law firm almost stopped its normal work, and the only thing every lawyer did when they came to work was vote. A month later, Huang Zupeng achieved his wish and was elected as one of the top 10 lawyers in the country. With this title, Huang Zupeng soon won the title of Top 10 Young Lawyers of Dongjiang Province and was elected as the vice president of the Dongjiang Provincial Lawyers Association, becoming an influential figure in the legal profession of the province. At that time, Gu Zheng admired Huang Zupeng from the bottom of her heart and almost regarded this senior brother as her idol, wholeheartedly wanting to learn from him. Huang Zupeng also gave Gu Zheng a lot of support, often introducing her to some cases and giving her advice for the cases she handled. If it hadn't been for later... Huang Zupeng picked up a thick stack of web pages that had been screenshotted from the internet from the desk and threw them in front of Gu Zheng, saying, Take a look at the online public opinion these days. Gu Zheng casually flipped through a few pages. Several online articles were whitewashing Master Wu and attacking Wang Sheng. Especially the comments below the articles were overwhelmingly condemning Wang Sheng for framing and defaming Master Wu, for being despicable and base, insidious and vicious, extremely filthy, and the most shameless villain in history, who must be severely punished according to law. They were filled with calls for violence. Some people even revealed with certainty the reason why Wang Sheng used the alias Under the Bodhi Tree to spread rumors and defame Master Wu was actually to discredit Du Wei, the chairman of Popular Art Media Group, to replace him, because Master Wu is Du Wei's godfather. Popular Art Media Group and the Yuanji Culture Research Association have multiple cooperative projects on the Phoenix Island Tourist Culture Island. Discrediting Master Wu and the Yuanji Culture Research Association is equivalent to discrediting Du Wei and the popular art Mudia Group, which can be said to kill two birds with one stone. How vicious the intention is. The famous movie star Little Swallow also posted an article on her personal blog in support of Master Wu, praising Master Wu for his high moral standing, for both his martial arts and ethics, and for his outstanding contributions to promoting Chinese traditional culture and local cultural undertakings. The so-called accusations against him on the internet were purely rumors and defamation, and she called for severe punishment of the rumor mongers. Gu Zheng remembered that Little Swallow was the first female disciple that Master Wu publicly accepted in the entertainment industry, and the media had once hyped it up. As far as I know, Wang Sheng is considered a learned person at popular art Mudia Group. He was handpicked by Du Wei, who was preparing to promote him to editor-in-chief. He actually repaid kindness with hatred, wanting to bring down Master Wu and Du Wei in one fell swoop. It's just a pity that he overreached himself and shot himself in the foot. Now, not only has he become a rat running across the street, but he also faces imprisonment. "I'm ashamed that our Dongda has such an alumnus," Huang Zupeng said in pain. "Gu Zheng, for someone who has no moral bottom line, do you want to oppose me and the entire Junding law firm and ruin your own future?" Huang Zupeng's last sentence had an obvious accusatory meaning, but Gu Zheng didn't say a word, looking at Huang Zupeng, who was dressed in brand names and had the air of a celebrity, for more than half a minute. Suddenly, she turned around and walked outside. "I forgot to tell you that President Zhuang of the Provincial High Court also practices Yuanji Gong. I heard that he has reached a very high level." Gu Zheng understood the implied meaning of this sentence, but she still walked out of Huang Zupeng's office without turning her head. 4. Where the water ends. From the moment she walked out of the law firm, Gu Zheng realized that whether she won or lost the lawsuit, Junding law firm would no longer be able to accommodate her. As Huang Zupeng said, from the moment she decided to appear in court for Wang Sheng, it was equivalent to placing herself in opposition to the entire legal community of Dongjiang province. Was the only thing awaiting her really the word defeat? Gu Zheng's mind conjured up Huang Zupeng's conceited and arrogant face, and she felt a little unwilling. But she had to admit that according to the results of her investigation and evidence collection, it would be difficult to refute the plaintiff's accusation of defamation against Wang Sheng, both legally and factually, unless the allegations in that letter of accusation against Master Wu were verified. For example, finding evidence that Master Wu and Meng Fei had committed adultery, or that An was indeed born to them, and evidence that the 1 million yuan that her brother Zhong Tianyi had provided to Master Wu was an investment rather than a donation. According to the statement in the letter of accusation, the so-called investment was Master Wu's verbal promise, with no written evidence. The only witness was Du Wei, but as Master Wu's adopted son, he obviously wouldn't testify. The only hope left was Meng Fei. If Meng Fei could provide evidence that she and Master Wu had an improper sexual relationship, proving that An was born to her and Master Wu, then the accusation of defamation against Wang Sheng would not be established. Gu Zheng's eyes lit up like a glimmer of light in the darkness. She decided to find Meng Fei. Over the years, Gu Zheng had rarely contacted her brother, and even less so with her sister-in-law, Meng Fei. After searching for a long time, she finally found Meng Fei's phone number in an old phone book, but she got a disconnected signal when she called. She called her brother's home several times, but no one answered. She had heard from Wang Sheng that after her brother fell ill, Meng Fei had left home with An. Later, Gu Zheng called the Phoenix Island Resort Art Troupe, where Meng Fei worked. A man answered the phone, speaking in a Niangzihu dialect, saying that director Meng Fei had resigned long ago. Gu Zheng asked where she could find her. The other party stammered and said, "Where can you find her? Go ask Master Wu." After saying that, he hung up the phone. Listening to the buzzing in the receiver, Gu Zheng savored the sentence, "Go ask Master Wu," which clearly had a hint of mischievousness. Gu Zheng put down the phone and was stunned for a while. Where could a living person go with a child? She thought of publishing a missing person notice in the newspaper or on television, but she found it ridiculous as soon as this thought popped up. Leaving aside whether Meng Fei would see the notice, even if she did, this method would scare her from showing her face. The glimmer of hope that Gu Zheng had just seen suddenly went out, and she was once again in a desperate situation. Just then, she received a call from Liu Jia. Since Liu Jia's case was withdrawn, Gu Zheng had lost contact with her. In the meantime, she had called Liu Jia to ask why she had withdrawn the case, but Liu Jia hadn't answered her calls. Later, due to getting involved in Wang Sheng's case, Gu Zheng had temporarily put this matter aside. Suddenly receiving a call from Liu Jia, she felt a little surprised. "Attorney Gu, are you in Dajiang? I want to see you." Liu Jia's voice was a little urgent on the phone, as if there was something important. Out of professional instinct, Gu Zheng realized that Liu Jia's sudden desire to see her must be related to the case last time. Regardless of the predicament that Wang Sheng's case was about to face in court, she immediately said, "You want to see me? When?" "Right now." Gu Zheng looked at her watch. It was already past 9 o'clock in the evening, but she still agreed without thinking. "Okay, where are you?" But Liu Jia didn't answer, only said, "Meet me at the old place," and hung up the phone. Gu Zheng was stunned momentarily before remembering that the old place was Jane Eyre to Fu. Similarly, the booth by the window, the waitresses wearing English-style wide-brimmed soft hats and green-trimmed long skirts, even the music playing was James's pan flute music. Only the song had changed from Going Home to The Lonely Shepherd. Gu Zheng liked this song very much, especially in winter. Listening to that plaintive music alone in the room was like being in a desolate wilderness, both lonely and empty, with a sense of detached beauty. The last time she met with Liu Jia here was in the hot summer, but this time it was in the dead of winter. It was bone-chillingly cold outside, but as warm as spring inside the cafe. Like a change of scene in a play, the stage setting hadn't changed, and the characters appearing hadn't changed either. Only the time had changed. Last time, Gu Zheng waited a long time before Liu Jia came, but this time, when Gu Zheng lifted the thick curtain and walked into the cafe, she was already sitting in the booth by the window, looking like she had been waiting for a while. She hadn't seen Liu Jia for several months, and she seemed to have lost a lot of weight. Although she was wearing thick winter clothes, Gu Zheng could still feel that she was much thinner than before. "Tell me, Liu Jia, why did you withdraw the case?" Gu Zheng asked this question that she had held in her heart for a long time after sitting down. Liu Jia had a cup of chrysanthemum tea in front of her. At this moment, her gaze was fixed on the chrysanthemums that had been soaked and stretched out by the boiling water in the glass. After a long while, she raised her eyes, looked at Gu Zheng, and said, "A few days before the court hearing, Chen Gang had someone send me a large envelope filled with photos. The person who came threatened that if I insisted on suing, Chen Gang would post these photos on the internet and completely ruin me." "What photos?" Liu Jia lowered her eyes and said haltingly, "Photos of me working at the Chuyun Entertainment City." Gu Zheng realized something and stopped asking any further questions. After a moment, she said, "Can you tell me about your experience working at Chuyun? Of course, I'm no longer your attorney. You can also choose not to say if you feel it's inconvenient." Liu Jia bit her lip and said as if she had made a great determination, "Okay, since things have come to this point, I won't hide anything from you anymore." Then, she told Gu Zheng about her experience in Chuyun Entertainment City. "I told you last time that I studied fashion modeling at a vocational college and was recruited by the Chuyun Group as a performer. Almost no one from our major goes to work in professional fashion modeling groups after graduation. Most of the sisters work in dance halls and nightclubs, dancing pole dances or even striptease, and some are even forced onto the path of prostitution. I was much luckier than those sisters when I was able to enter Chuyun to do fashion modeling. The average age of the performers at Chuyun is no more than 20 years old, and their height is over 1.7 meters. In addition to graduates of fashion modeling majors like me, there are also college students majoring in art from ordinary colleges and actors from provincial and municipal dance troupes. They are all carefully selected. When I first arrived at Chuyun, I was so happy that I often laughed out loud in my dreams, thinking that I could support my younger brother's studies with my own income from then on. But before long, I discovered that Chuyun's so-called fashion modeling was similar to the striptease in other dance halls and nightclubs. The clothes worn during the performances were extremely revealing, sometimes even completely naked, and the programs were also full of teasing and erotic undertones. Those who watched the performances were wealthy bosses. Some were high-ranking government officials. They were all gold card members of Chuyun, and the annual fee for each gold card was as high as tens of thousands of yuan. Zhang Xiaobo, the boss of Chuyun Group, was the son of a high-ranking cadre and had deep roots in the officialdom and business world of Dajiang. Most of these people came for him. The general manager of Chuyun Entertainment City was Shu Ku, who graduated from the Chinese department of Dongda and used to be the beauty of the Chinese department. She was also an announcer at the Dongjiang Institute of Economics and Management. She was very beautiful. She was Zhang Xiaobo's mistress, and some said they were already married. Their relationship was unusual. Otherwise, how could Zhang Xiaobo entrust her to manage the entertainment city? It is said that Shuku invented the gold card membership system of the entertainment city. The consumption of gold card members was a one-stop shop: eating, watching performances, and bathing. There was a high-end service called Mandarin duck bathing in the bath, where a special lady accompanied them. The consumption was all included in the gold card, but if they additionally sought out a performer who modeled fashion to accompany them, the price would be several times or even dozens of times higher. Those gold card members were either rich or powerful, so they naturally didn't care about the extra money. Each performer had a number on their body during the performances. Sometimes, before the performance ended, someone would raise a sign under the catwalk with the performer's number written on it. Someone would call out that performer backstage as soon as the performance ended. At first, I didn't understand the real meaning of accompanying bathing. Later, I learned that it was actually accompanying sleep. We got a fixed salary at the entertainment city, less than 3,000 yuan a month, but if we were chosen by a gold card member of the entertainment city to accompany them to sleep, we could earn more than 10,000 yuan at a time. I only found out about these things later. At that time, I was also chosen. The first time I was chosen, I refused. I heard that the person who chose me was the director of a state-owned enterprise. He chose me 3 times in a row. The last time, Shuku personally came backstage to work with me. Although I had been working in the entertainment city for a while, I rarely saw Shuku. Whenever I saw her by chance, I felt that she wasn't much older than me, and her temperament was extraordinary. She rarely had a smile on her face and seemed a little aloof, but that time she greeted me with a smile, saying many heartwarming things like a big sister. Director Lan is a good friend of Director Zhang. He has chosen you 3 times. If you don't give him face, you should at least give Director Zhang and me face, right? Besides, your family is in trouble, and you're counting on earning money to support your younger brother's college education. 3,000 yuan a month isn't even enough to support yourself, right? A series of earnest and well-meaning persuasions, especially that last sentence, finally moved me. From then on, I, like those sisters from my vocational college, embarked on a path of no return until I met Chen Gang. I told you that we would meet at Chuyun. Moreover, when Chen Gang and I first had a relationship, he already knew that I wasn't a virgin and didn't care about my past experiences. I also knew that he often went to Chuyun Entertainment City. He didn't care about my past experiences, and I didn't care about his past experiences either. We were even. That's what I thought. But from the moment he suddenly forced me to get a divorce, I knew that I was wrong. Chen Gang had actually always cared. It wasn't until he provided my experience at Chuyun as evidence to the court. This time he threatened to publish those photos on the internet. As Liu Jia spoke, her face was pale, and her eyes were filled with sadness and confusion, like a lost child. Gu Zheng didn't say a word for a long time. After a while, she suddenly remembered something. You just said that the general manager of Chuyun Entertainment City was named Shu Ku, and she graduated from the Chinese department of Dongda. As she spoke, she searched her mind for something. I remember a friend from when I was studying at Dongda. She was the president of the Langtaosha Literary Club. We lost contact after graduation, and I never knew where she was. Can you tell me where Shu Ku is now? I don't know. I left Chuyun shortly after Kengang and I met and lost contact with Shu Ku. Lu Jia shook her head. After Zhang Xiaobo, the boss of Chuyun Group, was arrested a few years ago and Chuyun Entertainment City was sealed off, Shu Ku also disappeared. Gu Zheng o-ed thoughtfully. Lu Jia continued from where she left off. After withdrawing the case, Chen Gang forced me to divorce him. A while ago, I got a severe cold and almost died. The child was gone, and I was kicked out of the Chen family. I've ended up in this state because of Chen Gang. I can't let him off so easily. I don't want economic compensation from him now. I want to retaliate against him. No, I want to report him. Gu Zheng was stunned when she heard. You want to report him for what? Chen Gang's father's name is Qian Wenlong. He used to be the director of the Provincial Development and Reform Commission. He's a big, corrupt official. He only retired 2 years ago. Even after retiring, he's still a member of the Provincial People's Political Consultative Conference. Lu Jia said, Qian Wenlong has more than a dozen properties in Dajiang and Beijing, and there are also 3 imported luxury cars, adding up to hundreds of millions of yuan. The property certificates are kept here with Chen Gang. I've seen them with my own eyes. Ever since Chen Gang and I had a falling out, he's transferred the property certificates away. But I've seen those properties and taken photos of them. Not long ago, I sent these photos to the Provincial Commission for Discipline Inspection as evidence of Qian Wenlong's corruption. I haven't heard anything back. But 2 days ago, when I went to the beauty salon to do my hair and returned, 2 people blocked me in the community. Chen Gang obviously sent them. They warned me that if I reported Qian Wenlong again, they would chop me into pieces and throw me into the Dongjiang River to feed the fish. Are you sure Chen Gang sent them? I'm sure. I've seen these 2 people before. They're Chen Gang's buddies, Lu Jia said firmly. Chen Gang has many friends in the underworld. He can do anything. Then what do you plan to do? Gu Zheng asked worriedly. I'm going all out. I must make their father and son pay an even greater price. Their father and son have a very strong backing, so I can't bring them down in Dongjiang. I'll go to Beijing to appeal. Lu Jia turned her gaze to Gu Zheng and said pleadingly, I've made a copy of the photos of Qian Gang's father and son's properties and luxury cars and kept it with a friend. If anything happens to me, please help me make it public online. As soon as Gu Zheng heard these words, she immediately thought of the case she was representing that was about to go to court. Wang Sheng had brought disaster upon himself because he posted his brother's letter of accusation on the internet. Did Lu Jia want her to repeat Wang Sheng's mistake? She wanted to refuse immediately, but when she saw Lu Jia's almost begging expression, she couldn't bear it. She wanted to persuade Lu Jia not to accuse Qian Gang and his son. You're still young. Take a step back and you'll see a vast sky. She had already thought of the words, but when she saw Lu Jia's pale face, she swallowed the words that were about to come to her lips. 5. Riots. Gu Zheng got up early on the day of the court hearing. The weather was still very cold. She took a down coat that she had bought not long after graduating from college from the closet and put it on. She didn't even bother to eat breakfast and hailed a taxi outside the Women's Federation dormitory community to rush to the court. South Lake District Court is in the Old City, not far from the Provincial Party Committee compound on Gongping Road. Next door is an elementary school facing the Provincial Communist Youth Lu Hague Committee across the street. The Provincial Communist Youth Lu Hague Committee's office building is only 3 stories tall and inconspicuous. Still, several signs are hanging in front of it, including the Dongjiang Provincial Youth Federation and the Dongjiang Provincial Reporter Station of the China Youth Daily. They are uneven and give people a sense of chaos. In contrast, the South Lake District Court building across the street is tall and has a dignified aura due to the national emblem on the building's curtain wall and the iron fence surrounding the entrance. South Lake District is located in the most prosperous commercial district of Dajiang City. Most of the departments at the bureau level are here, and it is also the area with the highest concentration of legal disputes. The number of cases the district court accepts each year ranks among the top in the city. Gu Zheng has handled many cases here and is very familiar with the environment. When she arrived at the court, it wasn't yet time for work. She had agreed to meet Wang Sheng at the entrance of the court. She raised her eyes and looked around, searching for Wang Sheng's figure. Suddenly, someone called out, "Gu Zheng, Attorney Gu!" from behind her. Gu Zheng turned around and saw Wang Sheng standing by the side of the road. He was still wearing the black leather jacket and a scarf around his neck. Because the weather was cold, he kept shifting his feet. A layer of white mist had formed on his disheveled hair. It seemed he had been there for a while. Gu Zheng glanced at the dilapidated bicycle parked beside him and asked, "Did you come by bike?" "Yeah, it's very close to the Literary and Art Federation, less than 2 stops." Wang Sheng rubbed his 2 red hands in front of his mouth, breathing on them, and looked Gu Zheng up and down. "Have you had breakfast yet?" Gu Zheng said. "Not yet." "It just so happens that I haven't eaten either." Wang Sheng seemed to be waiting for her to say this and immediately chimed in. "Let me treat you to breakfast." "Okay," Gu Zheng smiled. "There's a snack stall next to the elementary school with good hot dry noodles. I used to eat there when I came to court." Wang Sheng said, "Okay, let's do what you say." The 2 of them walked one after the other to the elementary school entrance next to the court. Sure enough, they saw a snack stall. The stall owner was a middle-aged woman. Steam was rising from the noodle pot. Many people gathered in front of the stall, all customers waiting to eat noodles. A 15 or 16-year-old boy was helping the middle-aged woman. Otherwise, she simply wouldn't be able to handle it. Wang Sheng went to line up in front of the snack stall. Gu Zheng sat down at a low table and picked up a newspaper that Wang Sheng had put on the table, browsing through it. Suddenly, an eye-catching headline caught her eye. "Under the Bodhi tree suspected of defamation case to be tried today. Famous female writer Song Xiaofan speaks out in support of Master Wu." This newspaper reports that in response to the Under the Bodhi tree case, which has caused a great uproar recently, our reporter interviewed the famous female writer Song Xiaofan, who recently returned to Dajiang province to visit relatives. Ms. Song said that Master Wu is a descendant of Empress Wu Zutian and the founder of Yuanji Gong. He has long been committed to promoting Chinese traditional culture and is very influential in Dongjiang province and even the whole country. Some people only want to slander and defame Master Wu under the guise of reporting. I express my strong indignation and severe condemnation of this vile and base behavior, and I hope that the law will severely sanction the slanderer. It is understood that the case will be tried today in the South Lake District Court. The attorney representing Master Wu is attorney Huang Zupeng, director of Junding Law Firm, top 10 lawyers of Dongjiang Province, and vice president of the Dongjiang Provincial Young Lawyers Association. This newspaper will follow up and report on the outcome of the case. Similar reports had occupied the home pages and headlines of major portals in Dongjiang Province for the past few days. They've even brought out Song Xiaofan. This is a decisive battle, Gu Zheng thought to herself, as if she smelled the same formula and flavor as the mother-insulting murder case from many years ago. Huang Zupeng's smug face floated in her mind, and the haze that had been pressing on her heart for days seemed to worsen. At this moment, Wang Sheng came back with 2 bowls of hot, dry noodles. After he sat down at the table, he saw that Gu Zheng was staring blankly at the newspaper, and his face suddenly became gloomy. Wang Sheng had obviously seen that news. Gu Zheng pretended to be doing something and picked up the bowl, smelling it, and said, "It smells so good." Wang Sheng understood her intentions and didn't bring up the case. He pulled out 2 pairs of chopsticks from a bamboo tube on the table, handed 1 pair to Gu Zheng, picked up the bowl silently, and buried himself in eating the noodles. He didn't say a word until he finished eating a bowl of hot, dry noodles. Gu Zheng was the same. The two of them seemed to be trying to avoid the case that was about to be heard in court, as if they weren't the defendant and the attorney in this case that was about to go to court, but just two ordinary diners. Gu Zheng ate most of the noodles in the bowl, but she couldn't eat any more. The hot, dry noodles, which she remembered as being so delicious, seemed to have lost their fragrance and become tasteless. I haven't seen Song Xiaofan since I graduated from Dongda. Gu Zheng looked at the photo of Song Xiaofan in the newspaper and sighed. I still remember that you wrote a review of Song Xiaofan's novel when you were in school. But Wang Sheng didn't pick up on Gu Zheng's words, as if he had forgotten about this matter. At this time, the iron fence gate at the entrance of the court opened, and then the door of the gatehouse next to it, which was equipped with security inspection equipment, also opened. These two doors, one large and one small, were open. The small door was for court staff and lawyers to enter and exit, and the large door was for people attending the court hearing to enter and exit. Gu Zheng looked at her watch. The hands had just pointed to the time for work. A long line of people at the court's entrance began to enter inside through the two doors. Gu Zheng and Wang Sheng stood up at the same time. They crossed the road and walked to the entrance of the court. Gu Zheng signaled Wang Sheng to enter through the other door. Wang Sheng stood in place, looking at Gu Zheng as if he couldn't make up his mind. He hesitated for a moment before walking to the main entrance. Gu Zheng withdrew her gaze and was about to walk to the small door when she suddenly saw a group of people emerge from nowhere. They all had yellow cloth strips tied around their heads with the words Yuanji Gong written on them. They held up signs and surged towards Wang Sheng like a tide, waving their fists and chanting slogans, "Resolutely uphold Master Wu's reputation. Rumor mongers go to hell. Defamers must be severely punished." Someone pointed at Wang Sheng and shouted, "He's the one who posted rumors." "That's right, it's him. He is under the Bodhi tree." His name is Wang Sheng, and he's the deputy editor-in-chief of Popular Art Mudia Group. Just looking at him, you can tell he's not a good person. In an instant, Wang Sheng was almost submerged by the slogans and curses. Two reporter-like people stuck microphones under Wang Sheng's nose and asked loudly, "Why did you post rumors to defame Master Wu? Do you have a private feud with him, or do you have other motives? What's the deep meaning behind you using the alias under the Bodhi tree?" Gu Zheng found this scene very familiar. In the mother-insulting murder case back then, Huang Zupeng personally selected her to join the legal team. When the defendant, Luo Xiaoji, was escorted from the detention center to the court's entrance and exited the car, a group of people suddenly emerged from nowhere, shouting slogans and spitting at Luo Xiaoji. This was clearly all arranged by Huang Zupeng. It was estimated that on-site eyewitness reports would soon appear in newspapers and online, such as, "Some members of the public gathered at the entrance of the South Lake District Court, showing support for Master Wu, condemning the defamer, and calling on the court to sentence him severely." Gu Zheng saw Wang Sheng standing in the crowd like a drowning child, helpless, and without any support. She didn't know where she got the strength from, but she suddenly turned around and ran towards the crowd, grabbed Wang Sheng, and rushed out. But the surroundings were tightly surrounded, and they couldn't break through at all. Someone kept spitting on them. Wang Sheng was hit on the head by a clod of dirt thrown by someone, and Gu Zheng was also spat on the face. At this moment, a police car drove out of the alley next to the court, and a team of police officers with batons in their hands jumped out, rushing towards the crowd. 6. In court. As the police dispersed the crowd, Wang Sheng finally made it safely inside the courthouse, only to find Gu Zheng still clutching his hand tightly. He saw the saliva that had been spat on Gu Zheng's face. He remembered how Gu Zheng had plunged in surrounded by the mob, grabbed his hand and pulled him out. A wave of gratitude washed over him. He withdrew his hand and pulled a tissue from his pocket, offering it to Gu Zheng. Gu Zheng took it, wiped the grime from her face, and returning the tissue, pointed to his forehead. "Does it hurt?" she asked. Only then did Wang Sheng become aware of the lump of dirt that had struck his head. He dabbed at it with a handkerchief. It's nothing. Just a scratch." He forced a grin, a pathetic attempt at a smile. The hearing was in courtroom 10. By the time Wang Sheng and Gu Jiang entered, there were still 10 minutes to spare. The room was small and boxy, like a conference room. A large national emblem hung on the wall behind the bench. The presiding judge, the judge, and the lay assessor were already seated. The presiding judge, a woman in her 40s, was short and stocky with a flat, unremarkable face, like a playing card. Dressed in her judicial robe, she nonetheless exuded an aura of authority. To her right sat the judge, a tall, thin man, ramrod straight like a telephone pole. To the presiding judge's left sat the lay assessor, a man in his 50s wearing casual clothes. His top button was undone, revealing his undershirt collar. His face was slightly puffy, like a security guard with pronounced bags under his eyes. He probably hadn't slept well the night before. He sat on the bench, yawning constantly, glancing around as if looking for an opportunity to slip away. The plaintiff's table to the right was empty. At the counsel table sat 2 people, a man and a woman. The man, impeccably dressed in a suit, radiated success. Wang Sheng remembered Gu Jiang's introduction. This must be her boss, the renowned lawyer Huang Zupeng. The pretty young woman beside him, engrossed in paperwork, was likely Huang Zupeng's assistant. Wang Sheng's gaze shifted from the plaintiff's table and the counsel table to the gallery. It was packed. As Wang Sheng and Gu Jiang entered, everyone turned to stare, whispering amongst themselves. He recognized 2 faces, recent hires from Popular Arts and Mudia Group. No doubt they had been sent by Du Wei. In a flash, Wang Sheng recalled a passage he had read the night before from Tolstoy's Resurrection. The courtroom was a large oblong hall. At one end was a raised platform, reached by 3 steps. In the center of the platform was a table covered with green cloth, trimmed with a deep green fringe. Behind the table were 3 oak armchairs with high, carved backs. On the wall behind the chairs hung a gilt-framed portrait of a general, depicted in vivid colors. The general wore a sash across his uniform, 1 foot forward, 1 hand resting on the hilt of his sword. In the right-hand corner was an icon stand with an image of Christ crowned with thorns. Before the icon stand stood a lectern. To the right was the high desk of the prosecutor. To the left, symmetrical with the prosecutor's desk, was the smaller table of the clerk, set far back. Near the public gallery was a smooth oak railing, behind which stood the long bench for the accused. The bench was empty now. To the right of the platform were 2 rows of high-backed chairs for the jurors, and below the platform were several tables for the lawyers. The hall was divided into 2 sections by a railing, all of this in the front section of the hall. The rear section of the hall was filled with benches, rising one above the other to the back wall. On the front benches in the rear of the hall sat 4 women, who looked like factory workers or housemaids, and 2 men, also laborers. They were clearly subdued by the solemn atmosphere of the court and spoke in hushed tones, almost timidly. As soon as the jurors were seated, the bailiff, staggering to the center of the court, as if to intimidate those present, bellowed out, "The court is now in session." All rose. The judges entered the platform. At the head, the imposing, bearded president of the court, followed by the gloomy-faced judge with gold-rimmed spectacles. He looked even gloomier now because, before the hearing, he had met his brother-in-law, a trainee judge, who had told him that he had just been to see his sister, who had announced that there would be no dinner at home. "So, it seems we shall have to go to a restaurant," the brother-in-law had said, laughing. "What is there to laugh at?" the gloomy-faced judge had said, his face darkening even more. The last to mount the platform was Matvey, who was always late. He had a large beard and kind, drooping eyes. He had been suffering from gastritis for a long time, and on the doctor's advice had begun a new treatment that morning, which had kept him at home longer than usual. He now walked onto the platform with a concentrated expression, for he had a habit of predicting all sorts of outcomes in various ways. He was now trying to divine whether the number of steps from his office to his armchair on the platform would be divisible by 3, in which case the new treatment would cure his gastritis. If not, it would not. There were 26 steps, but he shortened the last one so that there were exactly 27. The president and the judges, wearing uniforms with gold-embroidered collars, mounted the platform with a solemn air. They were conscious of this and seemed almost embarrassed by their own solemnity, hastily lowering their eyes and seating themselves in the carved armchairs behind the green baize table. On the table stood a triangular striker surmounted by a carved eagle, as well as several glass jars, such as are used in sweet shops, and inkstands, pens, white paper, and several sharpened pencils, thick and thin. The deputy prosecutor entered with the judges. He was as hurried as ever, with his briefcase under his arm, as busy as ever swinging one arm, quickly took his seat by the window and sat down, burying himself in his papers, making the most of every minute to prepare for the case. This was the 4th time the deputy prosecutor had brought the prosecution. He was eager for fame and promotion, so every case he prosecuted ended in a conviction. He knew the nature of this poisoning case in outline and had already drafted a speech, but he needed more information and was now hastily extracting it from the file. Wang Sheng had never been inside a courthouse before. His impressions came from literature. In preparation for the hearing, he had read Resurrection in college and had specifically reread the courtroom scenes. Now, the courtroom before him seemed vastly different from what he remembered. It lacked the gravity he had imagined. In recent days, the internet had been flooded with attacks and insults directed at him, peppered with fabricated rumors that were clearly orchestrated. Online, these people were called water armies. Even Song Xiaofan, a writer Wang Sheng once knew, had condemned him in an interview. He felt like a small boat riddled with holes, slowly sinking, awaiting a catastrophic end. The thought became clearer and clearer in his mind. Therefore, he held little hope for anything Gu Zheng was doing for the case. Especially after the disturbance outside the courthouse, the feeling intensified. Wang Sheng walked mechanically to the defendant's table and sat down. Gu Zheng sat beside him at the counsel table. There were fewer than 5 minutes before the hearing was scheduled to begin. The plaintiff's seat remained empty. Gu Zheng had predicted that Master Wu would not appear, most likely assigning a proxy. Of course, there was another possibility. Master Wu wouldn't even appoint a proxy, leaving everything to his lawyer. Wang Sheng had puzzled. What does that mean? Gu Zheng had replied, perhaps Master Wu believes he's already won before the hearing even begins. Wang Sheng gazed at Gu Zheng's familiar yet somehow distant face and asked, perplexed, why would you go up against your boss in a case you're bound to lose? Why? Gu Zheng avoided his gaze, paused for a moment, and then said, to uncover the truth. I don't believe my brother's whistleblowing letter was a fake, and I believe in your innocence. Wang Sheng felt his eyes sting, tears threatening to spill. Now Wang Sheng turned his gaze from the still empty plaintiff's table and met Gu Zheng's eyes. They exchanged a knowing look. See those people in the back row of the gallery? They're all reporters from the newspaper. They're tight with Huang Zupeng. They were there for the Luo Xiaoji case a few years ago. Wang Sheng had heard of the Luo Xiaoji case, but he didn't understand the implication. Huang Zupeng must have called them, Gu Zheng murmured. Then, before Wang Sheng could process it, she stood up and addressed the bench. Your Honor, given that the proceedings of this case may involve personal privacy, the defense requests a closed hearing. Gu Zheng's voice wasn't loud, but it stirred a buzz in the gallery. Huang Zupeng immediately rose to his feet and declared to the judge, Your Honor, the plaintiff believes the defense's request for a closed hearing is without sufficient grounds and recommends it be rejected. The presiding judge and the judge conferred for a moment. Then, the presiding judge responded, In accordance with relevant regulations, the defense's request for a closed hearing is granted. Please, everyone in the gallery, leave the courtroom. This announcement from the presiding judge sparked another murmur in the gallery. The reporters in the back row all turned to look at Huang Zupeng. Huang Zupeng was unhappy with the ruling but didn't object. With the gallery cleared, the courtroom became much quieter. Wang Sheng's anxiety seemed to ease a bit. He looked again at Gu Jiang beside him, a sense of reliance welling up for his old friend's younger sister. At that moment, the short, stocky presiding judge raised her gavel and struck it with a thud, announcing, "The court is now in session." To Wang Sheng, the heavy thud of the gavel didn't seem to originate from the bench, but from resurrection, giving him a surreal sensation. Like those described in Resurrection, the following proceedings were monotonous, trivial, and even dull. Plaintiff's name, age, occupation, address, ID number, defendant's name, age, occupation, address, ID number, plaintiff's counsel, defendant's counsel. The presiding judge asked each question in a flat, lifeless voice, like an interrogator verifying the identity of a prisoner, cold and impersonal. During this process, the judge to the presiding judge's right, who had been sitting bolt upright like a telephone pole, seemed to buckle under some unseen weight, his posture slumping as if in pain. The lay assessor to the presiding judge slumped in his chair, appearing to doze off. Next came the plaintiff's counsel's opening statement. The complaint had been prepared in advance. The woman beside Huang Zupeng read the complaint. Her Mandarin was standard, articulate, with a theatrical air that reminded Wang Sheng of the female broadcasters at the university radio station when he was a graduate student at Dongda. The first half of the complaint, a detailed and lengthy exposition of the alleged infringement, was filled with subjective conjecture and even personal attacks. The defendant, Wang Sheng, registered an online alias Bodhi Tree on Tianyanet. Using the name of Zong Tianyi, he engaged in defamation under the guise of whistleblowing. The defendant did this because Du Wei did not promote him to the position of editor-in-chief of Popular Arts and Media Group. Motivated by resentment, he aimed to smear his superior Du Wei and his godfather, the plaintiff, Wu Bozhong. As a highly educated intellectual, the defendant stooped to fabricating facts and slandering others for personal gain. His actions are despicable, shameful, and beyond the pale. Wang Sheng had seen the original complaint through Gu Jiang. It had not contained any of this. The current version was clearly augmented, much of it lifted from the internet. Wang Sheng felt deeply humiliated. Anger made his breathing shallow and rapid. A burning pain turned his face pale, and he began to shake uncontrollably, like someone with the ague, his teeth chattering. His knees trembled. Seeing this, Gu Jiang reached out and squeezed his knee, then abruptly stood up and announced to the bench, "Your Honor, the plaintiff's counsel's malicious speculation about the defendant's infringement and motives and wanton slander infringes on the defendant's right to personality. I strongly protest and request the court to stop the plaintiff's infringement." No sooner had Gu Jiang finished than Huang Zupeng rose from the plaintiff's table. "The plaintiff's assertions about the defendant's infringement and motives are not subjective conjecture. There is testimony provided by the witness Du Wei." He left the plaintiff's table, walked to the bench, and presented the testimony to the presiding judge. The presiding judge unfolded the testimony, looked it over, passed it to the judge on her right, then struck the gavel and declared in an unequivocal tone, "The defense's objection is overruled. The hearing will continue." Gu Jiang said, "One moment, Your Honor. May my client see the testimony?" The presiding judge hesitated, then nodded. Gu Jiang went to the bench, took the testimony from her hand, returned to her seat, and gave it to Wang Sheng. Wang Sheng looked at it. The slander in the complaint indeed came from Du Wei's testimony. His hand shook violently. He longed to tear the paper to shreds, but Gu Jiang stopped him. Otherwise, he might have been punished for contempt of court. "The defense will now present its response to the plaintiff's complaint," the presiding judge said dryly, turning her gaze to Wang Sheng and Gu Jiang. Gu Jiang had clearly been waiting for this moment. She unfolded her prepared statement, glanced calmly at Huang Zupeng across the room, then at the presiding judge, and said in a smooth, even tone, "Honorable presiding judge, judge and lay assessor, I am entrusted by the defendant, Wang Sheng, to respond as follows to the charges brought against my client by the plaintiff. The defense argues that the post published online by my client, Wang Sheng, was a whistleblowing letter addressed to the relevant authorities. After investigation, the relevant authorities should determine whether the content is accurate or constitutes defamation of the plaintiff, Wu Bozhong. The plaintiff's counsel has no right to unilaterally determine that the defendant's actions constitute the crime of defamation. Secondly, the defendant has no personal grievances against the plaintiff, Wu Bozhong, or the outside party, Du Wei. The plaintiff's accusation of the defendant's supposed defamatory motives is pure malicious speculation without any factual basis. Thirdly, the law has clear and explicit provisions regarding the crime of defamation. It can only be established if the infringement of reputation causes serious consequences to the plaintiff. In this case, the plaintiff has not suffered serious consequences due to the defendant's actions. Therefore, even if the defendant's actions infringed on the plaintiff's right to reputation, it does not constitute the circumstances required for the crime of defamation. Therefore, the plaintiff's lawsuit filed under the crime of defamation is an inappropriate application of the law, and the court should dismiss it in accordance with the law. Gu Zheng's voice was not loud, but it had an undeniable power. Wang Sheng's flagging spirits gradually lifted a little. Before he knew it, the hearing had lasted nearly an hour. The presiding judge announced a 5-minute recess. As soon as she spoke, the judge and the lay assessor beside her stood up eagerly and headed for the door. Wang Sheng had drunk a bowl of soy milk at a street stall for breakfast, and now felt the urge to relieve himself. He left his seat and headed outside the courtroom. There were several courtrooms on this floor, each with people standing outside, anxious and burdened. Some whispered to each other, stopping when someone approached. A burly bailiff stood at the end of the corridor, watching everyone intently. His wide leather belt pulled tight, making him look like a balloon about to take flight. The restrooms were around the corner. When Wang Sheng came out of the restroom, he saw the judge and the lay assessor who had left the courtroom first, smoking in the corridor. They were talking about something as they puffed away, but they stopped when they saw Wang Sheng. After he passed, they began muttering again. Wang Sheng heard the judge say, "If you hadn't let me have a shot last night, I would have lost badly." The lay assessor yawned and said, "No way, you were just on fire." Wang Sheng realized they were talking about mahjong. No wonder they both seemed so listless during the hearing, he thought. Only Huang Zupeng and the presiding judge were inside when he returned to the courtroom. Gu Zheng and Huang Zupeng's assistants were gone, and probably also in the restroom. The presiding judge was still sitting on the bench, while Huang Zupeng was standing opposite her, elbows on the bench, heads close together, speaking in hushed tones. They were so engrossed in their conversation that they didn't hear anyone enter the courtroom. Wang Sheng vaguely heard Huang Zupeng say, "Judge Niu said," but he stopped before finishing the sentence, turning to look at Wang Sheng warily. Wang Sheng felt Huang Zupeng's gaze, cold and hostile. Gu Zheng and Huang Zupeng's assistant returned to the courtroom a few minutes later. "Ling Shu just told me that the presiding judge and Huang Zupeng used to work together in the Department of Justice," Gu Zheng said in a low voice. Wang Sheng didn't respond. Thinking about Huang Zupeng and the presiding judge whispering together earlier, he felt his heart sink again like a stone. At that moment, the presiding judge struck the gavel again, and the hearing resumed. "We will now proceed to the examination of evidence," the poker-faced presiding judge announced. Huang Zupeng said eagerly, "The defense stated in its response that the post Wang Sheng published on Tianya.net was a whistleblowing letter. I argue that this is completely unfounded. Although the post was in the name of an outsider, Zhong Tianyi, it cannot be proven that Zhong Tianyi wrote it because Zhong Tianyi is deceased. The defendant could have forged the letter entirely. In short, the defendant impersonated another person to defame my client maliciously. His actions are reprehensible and must be severely punished." Huang Zupeng was speaking extemporaneously, appearing righteous and impassioned. It sounded as if he were reading a verdict. Wang Sheng felt every word like a nail being hammered into his heart. A feeling of near suffocation came over him. Although the courtroom was air-conditioned, he felt a chilling cold. He thought that if Zhang Tianyi were still alive, he wouldn't be saddled with the accusation of impersonating another person, and the truth behind the whistleblowing letter would come to light. Now, no matter how he explained, no one would believe him. At this point, the hearing was nearing its end. The poker-faced presiding judge asked, "Is the plaintiff willing to accept mediation?" "No." Huang Zupeng's response was arrogant, leaving no room for negotiation. His tone was confident of victory. "Is the defendant willing to accept court mediation?" The presiding judge turned her gaze to Wang Sheng and Gu Zheng and repeated the same question. Wang Sheng felt that it was pointless whether he answered yes or no. So, he remained silent. Gu Zheng thought he hadn't heard and tugged at his sleeve, but Wang Sheng still didn't speak. Gu Zheng had no choice but to answer for him. "Yes. This hearing is adjourned. The verdict will be announced at a later date." The poker-faced presiding judge raised her gavel, struck it heavily, and stood up. The judge and the lay assessor beside her also stood up. As Wang Sheng raised his numb legs and walked mechanically out of the courtroom, his mind was dazed, as if in a dream. He felt like the entire hearing was a continuation of his nightmare from the night before. He asked Gu Zheng, who was walking beside him, Is the hearing over?" "No." Gu Zheng looked at him with an odd expression, her voice clear but her meaning ambiguous. "Perhaps this is just the beginning." Wang Sheng sensed something between the lines in Gu Zheng's words, but he didn't understand what she meant. A passage from Resurrection suddenly flashed through his mind. The clerk finished reading the long indictment, packed up his papers, and sat down, smoothing his long hair with both hands. Everyone breathed a sigh of relief, pleasantly feeling that the trial was about to begin, that everything would come to light, and that justice would be done. Only Neklyudov did not have this feeling. He was horrified to think that Maslova, the innocent, sweet girl he had known 10 years ago, could have committed such a crime. Chapter 5. 1. Where to spend the New Year. Lunar December 24th was the Little New Year. That day, the verdict for Wang Sheng's first instance trial was handed down. As Gu Zheng received the call from the district court, notifying her to collect the verdict, she still hoped the court had accepted her defense arguments, ruling that Wang Sheng was not guilty of the defamation charges brought by the plaintiff. Instead, she hoped it would be transferred to the civil court and tried as a case of reputational damage. If so, Wang Sheng could avoid a prison sentence. However, as Gu Zheng received the judgment from the judge's assistant, a line of text leaped out at her. Following the court's investigation, it has been determined that the defendant, Wang Sheng, published a so-called whistleblowing letter online under the name of Zhang Momu, deceased, deliberately fabricating false facts and slandering and framing the plaintiff, Wu Bozhong, causing serious damage to his reputation and mental well-being. According to Article 20 of Chapter 20 of the Criminal Law of the People's Republic of China, the actions of the defendant, Wang Sheng, constitute the crime of defamation, and he is hereby sentenced to 3 years of imprisonment. Suppose the defendant does not accept this judgment. In that case, he may appeal to the Dajiang City Intermediate People's Court of Dongjiang Province within 3 months from the date of publication of this judgment. Not only was he found guilty of defamation, but he received the maximum sentence of 3 years for that crime. Gu Zheng couldn't accept the result. She felt as if she were the defendant, not the lawyer. An intense flame of anger rose within her, threatening to burst from her body. Huang Zupeng's smug face flashed before her eyes. She barely managed to control herself until she left the courthouse, when her emotions finally calmed down a little. She wondered if she should tell Wang Sheng the verdict immediately, but as Wang Sheng's childlike, bewildered expression flashed in her mind, she hesitated. It wasn't that she was worried Wang Sheng couldn't handle the blow, but that she couldn't bear to do it. Therefore, she decided to prepare for the appeal first. Regardless of the initial court's ruling, they would appeal to the intermediate court. That was the agreement between Gu Zheng and Wang Sheng. However, she hadn't heard any trace of Meng Fei to date. That was the only hope to overturn the plaintiff's accusations. This left Gu Zheng unsure of the outcome of the second trial, but out of a lawyer's professional ethics and an almost instinctive faith in the law, she had to use the existing evidence to do her best to protect and fight for Wang Sheng's rights. By the time Gu Zheng had prepared all the legal documents for the appeal to the intermediate court, it was already lunar December 29th. From the sporadic firecrackers and fireworks set off by the children in the neighborhood, she realized that tomorrow was New Year's Eve, and the annual spring festival was approaching again. A kind of intangible loneliness washed over her. Since childhood, this loneliness had followed Gu Zheng like a shadow whenever the spring festival approached. She was afraid of the spring festival. Whenever she saw other families, parents, and children happily gathering together, while she had only her brother as a relative, alone and isolated, she felt a deep fear of the spring festival. Why did this world have to have a spring festival? She even felt a strange hatred for the person who invented it. After graduating from university, except for a few spring festivals spent with her brother at her maternal grandparents' house, Gu Zheng had always spent the spring festival traveling. She remembered the spring festival of 2000 most vividly. She took a train for 3 days and 3 nights, traveling alone to Mohu, thousands of kilometers from Dajing. It was on the Sino-Russian border in China's highest latitude region. It was said that one could see the earliest sunrise of the Lunar New Year in the 21st century there. On the morning of Lunar New Year's Eve, Gu Zheng followed some young people who had also come to Mohu from all over the country to see the sunrise. They arrived at the edge of a forest, the most suitable place to watch the sunrise on the city's outskirts. It was still dark, and the thick, snow-covered plains shone white at night like a blade flashing with cold light. The north wind whipped across her cheeks, stinging like a knife. Gu Zheng wore a thick down jacket, but after standing on the snowy plains for nearly half an hour, her legs were frozen like ice pops, almost losing all sensation. Later, someone gathered a pile of branches from the forest and lit a bonfire on the snow. Gu Zheng and the other young people held hands, singing and dancing around the bonfire. It wasn't so much the blazing bonfire as the young people's unique vitality that dispelled the cold from their bodies. After a while, someone suddenly shouted, "It's going to be dawn!" Gu Zheng looked east. A line of fish-belly white appeared at the end of the dark forest. Gradually, the fish-belly white turned rose-colored, growing larger and spreading toward the sky. "The sun is about to rise," someone shouted nervously and excitedly. It was a girl's voice with a Hunan accent. Gu Zheng had met her during a transfer in Beijing. Her name was Liu Jiming. She was 18 or 19 years old with a baby face. She was a sophomore at Xiangtan University. When they heard that the other was going to Mohu to see the sunrise, they decided to travel together all the way to Mohu. Just then, a rising sun slowly emerged from the horizon. At first, it was just a shallow arc. In the blink of an eye, half the sphere was visible. After a while, the entire sun emerged from the ground, big, round, red, and bright like a child's face, radiating dazzling light. "The first sunrise of the 21st century," Gu Zheng heard Liu Jing say softly again and felt a small hand tightly clutching hers. The two embraced tightly. Gu Zheng felt Liu Jing's petite body trembling. She felt an electric shock, and her body trembled slightly as well. This was the first time she had been so intimate with someone of the same sex. It was wonderful. "Yes, the first sunrise," Gu Zheng couldn't help but say. Her eyes were wet with emotion. In Gu Zheng's memory, that was the best spring festival she had ever had. Where should she spend this New Year's Eve? Gu Zheng hadn't decided. Wang Sheng's case made the upcoming spring festival feel so alien. She suddenly thought of her brother, Zhong Tianyi. Over the years, she had only spent one spring festival with her brother and Meng Fei. An Anne was just born then, and they looked so happy. Maybe she could spend the new year at her brother's house if there was nowhere else to go. As soon as this thought appeared, Gu Zheng realized that her brother was dead, and her sister-in-law and niece, An, were nowhere to be found. Moreover, whether An was her real niece was not even certain. The case she handled during this time was also related to her brother. In fact, she was defending Wang Sheng to find out the truth behind the whistleblowing letter. Gu Zheng's mind was empty, and her heart became extremely vulnerable. She was gripped by a sadness she had never felt before. She buried her face in the quilt, and tears gushed from her eyes, instantly soaking the quilt. At first, Gu Zheng tried to suppress it. Later, she simply burst into tears. She hadn't even cried like this when her mother and brother died. For many years, she had thought she couldn't cry. In college, Li Hong had joked, "Gu Zheng, I've never seen you cry like a cold-blooded animal." At that time, Li Hong had just broken up with Lang Tao and cried all day like Lin Daiyu. On New Year's Eve morning, Gu Zheng received a call from her maternal grandfather. In recent years, Gu Zheng always spent it at her maternal grandparents' house when she had nowhere to go for the spring festival. In Gu Zheng's heart, her maternal grandparents were the last two relatives she had in this world. With her brother gone, Gu Zheng felt that even more this year's spring festival should be spent with her grandparents. Therefore, when she heard her grandfather's voice, she thought he was calling her to have the reunion dinner. But as soon as she heard her grandfather's voice, she felt something was wrong. Her maternal grandmother usually called her. Her grandfather rarely called her. She felt her grandfather's voice was low, hoarse, and unfamiliar. "Zheng, where are you spending the New Year this year?" Her grandfather's tone didn't sound like he was inviting his granddaughter to a reunion dinner, giving Gu Zheng a bad premonition. She subconsciously asked, "Are Grandma and Uncle doing well?" "Xiaole is in trouble." Gu Zheng heard her grandfather's words from the phone and quickly asked, "Uncle, what happened to him?" Her grandfather said, "Your uncle led people to attack the company building and caused a big disaster." "Attacking the company building?" Gu Zheng was shocked. Why? "Isn't it because of the Donggang merger?" her grandfather said, stammering. "Last night the police arrested your uncle, saying he would be sentenced. Zheng, your grandmother is so frightened that she's sick. I thought you were a lawyer and wanted you to come over and give me and your grandmother some advice." Hearing her grandfather's pleading tone on the phone, Gu Zheng felt a sinking feeling in her heart and quickly said, "Grandpa, wait for me. I'll come over right away." Attack, merger, sentencing. During this time, the death of her brother, Zhang Tianyi, and the cases of Lu Jia and Wang Sheng had kept Gu Zheng a bit overwhelmed. Now, her uncle Gu Xiaolu had suddenly gotten into trouble again. She felt as if her head were filled with weeds, even more chaotic. On the way to her maternal grandparents' house, Gu Zheng felt restless and uneasy, recalling the times she had spent there as a child. Her uncle, Gu Xiaolu, who was 2 years younger than her, was always so naughty, breaking her grandparents' hearts. Of course, he also made her angry a lot. 2. Gu Xiaolu. A little after 5 in the afternoon of the day before Lunar New Year's Eve, Gu Xiaolu dropped off a college student heading home for the holidays on Ganghua 4th Road and started driving his motorcycle taxi home. He was heading home early for 2 reasons. First, tomorrow was New Year's Eve, and every household was preparing for the holiday. He had to return and help his parents prepare the New Year's feast. In recent years, his parents had been getting older, and their energy was not what it used to be. He couldn't just wash his hands of family matters as he had in the past. Gu Xiaolu had an even more important reason to go home early. Yesterday, he had finally received the keys to his new apartment. After the Spring Festival, he and his wife, Cheng, could move into their own place. These past few years of living with his parents had been cramped, to say nothing of the petty squabbles between Cheng and his mother, which he had endured enough of. As a son, he couldn't help but think of his mother. As a husband, he couldn't help but protect his wife. For years, he had been stuck in the middle, like a rat in a bellows, longing to buy an apartment, move out, and give himself some peace and quiet, and his parents too. However, after graduating from college and being assigned to Donggang, he spent several years as a worker in the workshop. He had finally managed to transfer to the factory office and become a cadre, but Donggang's performance had steadily declined, and sometimes they couldn't even pay wages. Then came the factory's restructuring, transforming from a state-owned to a joint stock enterprise. Like most of Donggang's cadres and workers, Gu Xiaolu hoped the restructuring would improve the company's performance. But in recent years, not only had their income not increased, it had actually decreased. Just as his dream of saving enough money to buy an apartment and move out with Cheng Lei was about to evaporate, his father stepped in to help. Gu Xiaolu was somewhat surprised that his father had offered to help him buy an apartment. Ever since he had been in college, he and his father hadn't gotten along very well. His father always held him to the standards of a model worker, spouting slogans about the working class needing a sense of ownership and selfless dedication until Gu Xiaolu was sick of hearing them. At graduation, his father had even forced him to give up the opportunity to go directly to the factory and become a cadre, making him work in the workshop for several years. He had harbored resentment towards his father ever since. Usually, father and son didn't speak, and when they did, they clashed like enemies. Not only was his mother worried about them, Gu Xiaolu himself felt awkward. His wife, Cheng Lei, often got angry and returned to her father's house. Cheng Lei's father was called Cheng Guojun and had once been Gu Xiaolu's father's apprentice. Gu Xiaolu and Cheng Lei's marriage was partly due to the relationship between their fathers. During the Cultural Revolution, Cheng Guojun was a notorious rebel at Donggang and spent several years in prison. After his release, he had no job. He made a little money by buying scrap metal in the Donggang factory area and trading stocks. Cheng Guojun was among the first people at Donggang to buy an apartment. The money for the apartment had come from trading stocks. Gu Xiaolu had heard all this from his father. When his father spoke of his apprentice and in-law, his tone revealed a hint of admiration. Gu Xiaolu, on the other hand, was somewhat dismissive. What was so great about a released convict? But he only thought this in his heart, not daring to reveal it to his father. Soon after, he discovered that his father had also started trading stocks, following his father-in-law's lead. Now, his father had suddenly produced 100,000 yuan to help him buy an apartment. Clearly, he had made the money trading stocks with Cheng Guojun. Gu Xiaolu thought his father would be lucky not to lose money trading stocks, but he actually made so much. It was truly unexpected. Of course, what was even more surprising was that his father had taken the money he had made and given it to him to buy an apartment. 2 years ago, relying on his father's 100,000 yuan, his savings, and his wife, Cheng Lei, Gu Xiaolu bought a 2-bedroom apartment without hesitation. To save money, he purchased a pre-construction apartment, which he couldn't move into for 2 years. Now, Gu Xiaolu had finally received the keys to his new apartment, and his mood was easy to imagine. His wife, Cheng Lei, had argued with his mother a few days ago over a trivial matter and had gone back to her father's house again. So, Gu Xiaolu finished work early today, planning to go to his father-in-law's house to bring Cheng Lei back for the new year. His mother had also told him to call Gu Zheng and invite her to their house for the new year. Gu Xiaolu had always admired this niece of his, who was 2 years older than him, but he never felt that way about his other nephew, Gu Zheng's brother, Zong Tianyi. When he heard the news of Zong Tianyi's death more than half a year ago, he wasn't particularly saddened. Even though Zong Tianyi was a big boss, he gave them a generous gift of 10,000 yuan when he and Cheng Lei married. Gu Xiaolu had always had a close, almost childish affection for Gu Zheng. Gu Zheng had graduated from a prestigious university and was now a lawyer, while he was just a college graduate. From the time he was a child, his father had always used Gu Zheng as an example when educating him. This had invisibly increased his niece's importance in his mind. He thought it would be happy if Gu Zheng could come to their house for the new year. At least in front of his wife, Cheng Lei, he would feel good about himself. In winter, the days were short and the nights were long. Although it wasn't even 5:30, it was almost dark. The streetlights on both sides of Renmin Avenue had already come on. Usually, at this time, this main road in Steel City was packed with people leaving work, a bustling, crowded scene. But now, With the end of the year approaching, few pedestrians and vehicles could be seen. It seemed somewhat empty. As he passed the factory office building, Gu Xiaolu saw that the lights in the square were broken. The tall statue of Chairman Mao was shrouded in darkness, appearing somewhat blurred. The scene from just a few days ago flashed before his eyes. 3 days earlier, Gu Xiaolu was taking a passenger to the factory hospital when he suddenly received a call from his mentor, Mao, saying that the representatives of Duku Company had arrived in Dajiang yesterday. This morning, they would hold a signing ceremony at the company building to merge with Donggang. He asked him to notify the motorcycle taxi drivers around him so they could go to the factory office building to protest on time. 6 months ago, news that Dongjiang Steel Company was going to be acquired by Duku Company had begun to circulate among Donggang's cadres and workers. Although Duku Company was a large company ranked in the world's top 500, the merger terms were very harsh. Not only was the price lower than many people had expected, but the conditions were extremely demanding. In addition to a 51% controlling interest, they also wanted to lay off a third of Donggang's existing nearly 100,000 cadres and workers. According to this provision, Gu Xiaolu would also be among those laid off. As soon as the news came out, it caused strong indignation among the cadres and workers. After Donggang Company was restructured, its performance did not improve. It actually worsened year by year, and it even suffered losses for several years. Many workers couldn't even get their wages and bonuses, while the management took tens or even hundreds of thousands of yuan in annual salaries. Everyone had long been full of complaints. As soon as the merger news came out, the voices of opposition erupted like a flood that had finally found a breach. For half a year, batches of people had gone to the company building and even the provincial party committee to petition without any interruption. For a while, the company management said they would temporarily shelve the merger plan, but they didn't stop. They continued to conduct it secretly in private. So, when they heard that Donggang was about to hold a merger signing ceremony with Duku Company, everyone was furious, feeling betrayed. Most motorcycle taxi drivers in Steel City were laid off or waiting for job Donggang employees. They were also among the first victims of Donggang's restructuring. Mao was one of them. Gu Xiaolu worked in the workshop after graduating from college, and Mao was his mentor. The two had always had a good relationship. Mao had also helped him get his motorcycle taxi license. Mao had been the chairman of the union in a branch factory, and he was a bold, righteous person with a lot of prestige among the workers. He was someone whose call would be heeded by many. This time, he and several other workers initiated the boycott activity for the merger signing ceremony. As a mentee, Gu Xiaolu should support his mentor's call. Moreover, if the company were to be merged, he would be the first to face layoffs. To defend his own interests, he had to boycott this signing ceremony resolutely. The next morning, when Gu Xiaolu drove his motorcycle taxi to the factory office building, he saw that the square was already packed with people. Everyone was riding on their motorcycle taxis, lined up in neat rows, the helmets on their heads gleaming in the sunlight, looking like a disciplined army. Around 8 o'clock in the morning, led by Mao and others, people shouted slogans. "We want to eat, we want to work." "Resolutely oppose selling Donggang cheaply." "Whoever signs is a traitor to the workers." "Down with the traitors, down with the national traitors." "Long live the workers." Then everyone began to sing, "We workers have power. Hey, we workers have power. Working hard every day. Hey, working hard every day. Building high-rise buildings, building railways and mines, transforming the world. Oh, how it has changed. Hey, starting the machines, roaring loudly, raising the hammers, ringing loudly, making plows for good production. Oh, making guns to send to the front. Hey, 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 yo. Our faces are glowing red. Our sweat is dripping down. Why? To seek liberation. Why? To seek liberation." The high-pitched, rough, and powerful singing echoed in the air, shaking the very atmosphere. 2 people exited the factory office building at the workers' request. The person walking on the right was Chu Dongliang, the chairman and party secretary of Donggang Company. The person on the left was a tall, thin man wearing a suit with a side part in his hair. He looked unfamiliar, and it was unclear who he was. He is the plenipotentiary representative sent by Dooku Company and also the new president of New Donggang after the merger, Mao told Gu Xiaolu. The news spread quickly, and many people fixed their gazes on the tall, thin man, their eyes flashing angrily. Chu Dongliang was in his 50s, formerly the head of Donggang's supply and sales department. He had a hippopotamus-like mouth and was short and fat, like a pile of dough. Donggang had been declining day by day under his leadership. To begin with, the workers didn't have a good impression of him. As soon as he opened his mouth to speak, everyone shouted in unison, "Donggang belongs to the workers of Donggang. You have no right to sell it to foreigners." "Get down, you spendthrift!" Someone spat at Chu Dongliang and threw banana peels. Chu Dongliang was hit several times. He looked embarrassed, his fat body dodging left and right, muttering, "Comrades, don't be impulsive." Someone immediately ridiculed, "Look at you, full of fat and brains, who are your comrades?" A burst of laughter rang out from the crowd. Chu Dongliang was a little embarrassed but still insisted on shouting, "Everyone, please be quiet. Please listen to the speech of the plenipotentiary representative of Dooku Company, Mr. Yan, who is also the general manager of the new Donggang after the merger." As soon as they heard this, everyone quieted down and turned their eyes to the tall, thin man. "Fellow workers and compatriots, first of all, on behalf of Dooku Company China, I would like to extend my cordial greetings to you," Mr. Yan said in a sharp voice, raising an arm and waving it in the air. "I fully understand your emotions, but I want to solemnly remind everyone that our Dooku Company's merger with Donggang is a commercial act approved by the relevant government departments and protected by law. Second, Donggang's operation is currently on the verge of bankruptcy. If it were not for Dooku Company's merger, many workers would face immediate unemployment and not even get a penny of compensation. Now, we are willing to take out a sum of money to compensate everyone. You should be grateful and repay our kindness. How can you bite the hand that feeds you?" Everyone was enraged by Mr. Yan's words. The crowd was filled with boos, which quickly drowned out his voice. "Shameless bastard! We have 2 hands and can work. Who cares about your compensation?" "That's right. We'll raise money to buy Donggang and let the workers run it ourselves. Donggang is our Donggang. Drive out this foreign devil." Gu Xiaolu heard Mao shout the last sentence beside him. He also shouted along, waving his fist, his eyes flashing with anger. Immediately afterward, people shouted in unison, "Drive out this foreign devil!" As they shouted, they surged forward like a tide. Gu Xiaolu followed behind Mao, surrounded by an angry crowd. He felt like he was in a turbulent river, his whole being transformed into a drop of water, and a solemn feeling he had never felt before welled up in his heart. Chu Dongliang and Mr. Yan were surrounded by the crowd surging in from all directions. People waved their fists, raining blows down on them. Gu Xiaolu also raised his fist. He heard a scream. It wasn't clear whether it was Chu Dongliang or Mr. Yan's voice. It sounded like a pig being slaughtered, which was very creepy. Now, as Gu Xiaolu drove his motorcycle taxi past the factory office building, he seemed to hear the deafening slogans again. He felt a chill and couldn't help but speed up. The motorcycle taxi exited Renmin Avenue and turned onto Ganghua Second Road. Not far ahead was Ganghua First Road. Gu Xiaolu smelled the aroma of meat wafting from a house's window by the side of the road, carrying a strong New Year's Eve dinner smell. He thought his parents should have finished cooking by now. After he ate dinner, he would go to his father-in-law's house to bring his wife, Cheng Lei, back. At the same time, he reminded himself not to forget to call his niece, Gu Zheng, and invite her to their house for the new year. But just as he reached the building where his family lived, 2 people suddenly emerged from the shadows by the side of the road. One of them asked in a low voice, "Are you Gu Xiaolu?" Gu Xiaolu was taken aback and nodded. "Yes, you—" But before he could finish speaking, the other man put a pair of handcuffs on his hands. "We are from the District Public Security Bureau. You are under criminal detention." In the dim light of the streetlights, Gu Xiaolu saw the police uniforms the men were wearing. The cold sound of the handcuffs made the scene that had happened in the factory office building square 3 days ago flash through his mind. He immediately understood what was happening. "Can you let me go home and tell my parents?" he said pleadingly, but the other man said coldly, "We'll notify them. Let's go." 3. Uncle. On the first day back to work after the Spring Festival, the morning of the 6th day of the Lunar New Year, Gu Zheng went to the detention center to visit her uncle, Gu Xiaolu. The detention center wasn't far from the Donggang Workers' Sanatorium. When she was a child, her maternal grandfather, as a model worker, had spent time in the sanatorium every year. Gu Zheng and her uncle had eaten in the sanatorium's cafeteria once. She remembered the food was much better than in Donggang's workers' cafeteria. Now the workers' sanatorium had been converted into the Donggang Infectious Disease Prevention Hospital. People in white coats and masks went in and out occasionally, and security guards in uniform stood guard at the entrance, giving it the feeling of a prison. Gu Zheng wasn't a direct relative of Gu Xiaolu, so besides checking her ID card, the detention center gate guard carefully examined her lawyer's license. The Spring Festival holiday had just ended, and very few people were visiting the detention center. Gu Zheng was the only person in the large visiting room. White walls, white floors, everything was white. There was no heating, and the room was like an ice cave. Gu Zheng sat on the cold bench and waited for almost half an hour before Gu Xiaolu was led into the visiting room by a police officer. A small window with iron bars separated Gu Zheng and Gu Xiaolu. Perhaps because the walls of the visiting room were white, Gu Xiaolu's face looked as pale as if it had been coated with mercury. He sat on the stool, his prison clothes thin, shrinking his body. His eyes were dim and lost, and his eyeballs were bloodshot. It was obvious that he hadn't slept well for several days. His round face had thinned, his chin had become pointed, and a large patch of stubble-like weeds had grown on his face because he hadn't shaved for several days. Gu Xiaolu's dim eyes suddenly lit up as soon as he saw Gu Zheng. He called out, "Zheng Zheng, you're here!" Hearing Gu Xiaolu call her Zheng Zheng, as he had when she was a child, Gu Zheng's heart stirred, and her eyes turned red. "Uncle, Grandpa and Grandma asked me to come and see you." After saying this, she didn't know what to say next. "My dad and my mom, are they doing okay?" "They're okay," Gu Zheng said half a sentence and stopped. She was thinking in her heart, how could they possibly be okay? On New Year's Eve, as soon as she entered her grandparents' house, she saw it was cold and desolate, with no festive atmosphere. Her grandmother was lying in bed, with a towel wrapped around her head, looking ill. As soon as she saw Gu Zheng, she stretched out her hands and grabbed her, crying as she said, "Zheng Zheng, your uncle has gotten into big trouble this time. What are we going to do?" Her grandfather also sighed beside her. "Zheng Zheng, Xiaolu has violated the laws of the country. You're a lawyer. Can you think of a way to save your uncle?" His tone was as if he saw her as a savior. Gu Zheng didn't know what to say. She knew how important her uncle was to her grandparents. No matter how often they bickered and argued with him, they regarded him as the apple of their eye. Now that he had gotten into such big trouble, how could they not be worried? Gu Zheng had already searched the internet and roughly understood the cause and effect of her uncle's troubles. "Organizing workers to provoke trouble, beating the foreign representative to death," the Dongjiang Daily had reported on the front page. The case of gathering a crowd to provoke trouble and cause death that occurred at Donggang Company recently, the purpose of which was to resist the merger and reorganization of Dongjiang Steel Company and the American Duku Company, is a serious illegal incident incited and planned by a small group of people with ulterior motives. The nature of the incident is extremely bad, and the few lawless criminals must be severely punished in accordance with the law in order to maintain the overall situation of reform and opening up in our province. Seeing such stern wording, Gu Zheng knew that what her uncle had done was no small matter and that its seriousness far exceeded the scope of her small lawyer's knowledge. But from a legal point of view, the extent of criminal responsibility that her uncle should bear in this case of causing death was not without room for maneuvering. Of course, Gu Zheng couldn't be too explicit with her grandparents, who had little legal knowledge. She vaguely comforted them. "Don't worry, Uncle is still in custody awaiting trial. The next step is for the prosecutor's office to file a lawsuit with the court. As the defendant, the uncle has the right to hire a lawyer. I will appear in court to defend my uncle when that time comes." Her grandparents seemed to understand her words, but the anxious expressions on their faces relaxed a lot. At that moment, Gu Zheng, seeing Gu Xiaolu's helpless appearance, couldn't help but feel pity. Thinking of the promise she had made to her grandparents, she felt even more obligated to do her best to help her uncle, who was in prison. According to what her uncle had done, she really could only do her best, she thought, and couldn't help but smile wryly. "Uncle, I've learned a little about the case. The district procuratorate is about to file a public prosecution, and the district court will hear the case. I will be your defense attorney. Since it's just after the New Year's holiday, I still need to understand the specific situation from the court," Gu Zheng said, taking a power of attorney out of her briefcase and passing it through the window. "This is a power of attorney for you to hire me as your defense attorney. You need to sign it." When Gu Zheng said this, she had forgotten her relationship with Gu Xiaolu as aunt and nephew. Then she asked Gu Xiaolu in detail about the entire process of the riot that had occurred in front of the Donggang office building that day, especially every detail of how the Duku company representative named Yan had been beaten to death, whether Gu Xiaolu had participated in the beating, etc. She asked again and recorded everything in her notebook. Gu Xiaolu answered very seriously, looking at Gu Zheng with a strange look, as if the person in front of him wasn't the niece who had grown up with him but a stranger. After asking all the questions she wanted, Gu Zheng put away her notebook and remembered that her grandparents had asked her to bring a jar of chicken soup to Gu Xiaolu. She hurriedly picked up the ceramic jar next to the stool and said, "Uncle, Grandma cooked this jar of chicken soup all night and asked me to bring it to you." Hearing this, Gu Xiaolu's eyes lit up with excitement. He licked his lips and couldn't wait to open the ceramic jar and take a deep breath. "It smells so good. The food in the detention center these days doesn't even have a few drops of oil. I've been so hungry." Seeing Gu Xiaolu looking so hungry, Gu Zheng thought, "This is just the beginning," and felt another twinge of pity in her heart. At this moment, the police officer, standing like a tree stump behind Gu Xiaolu, said, "Gu Xiaolu, your visiting time is up. Go back to your cell." Gu Xiaolu was startled, as if he had just realized his situation. The light in his eyes suddenly went out like a flame. He put the lid on the ceramic jar, reluctantly looked at Gu Zheng, and obediently followed the police officer out of the visiting room. But after taking only 2 steps, he stopped again and said to Gu Zheng, Zheng, I'm asking you to do something for me. You have to help me." Seeing Gu Xiaolu's solemn expression, Gu Zheng asked, "What is it?" "Go and find Cheng Lei. She hasn't come to see me these past few days since I came in." Gu Xiaolu lowered his eyelids. "Tell her about my situation and tell her not to worry." As he spoke, he tore something off his neck and stuffed it into Gu Zheng's hand. Gu Zheng looked and saw it was a heart-shaped turquoise stone, understanding his thoughts. She knew that Gu Xiaolu and Cheng Lei had been in love since they were in school. There were ups and downs along the way, and they finally married. The couple often argued and had nearly divorced several times. Gu Zheng didn't know the specific reasons. Still, at that moment, seeing Gu Xiaolu's uneasy appearance, she guessed that what Gu Xiaolu was really worried about wasn't that Cheng Lei would worry about him, but that she was afraid Cheng Lei would want to divorce him because of his situation, right? After Gu Xiaolu told Gu Zheng Cheng Lei's address, he followed the police officer back to his cell. Gu Zheng came out of the detention center and saw that it wasn't even noon, so she went to find Cheng Lei, according to Gu Xiaolu's address. The neighborhood where Cheng Lei lived wasn't far away. It only cost the starting price to take a taxi there. The neighborhood was called Chengnan Garden, and it was one of the earliest apartment complexes in Steel City. The buildings weren't tall, the exteriors were rough, and the neighborhood management wasn't as strict as the apartment complexes in the central city. The gate was wide open, there weren't even any security guards, and no one asked Gu Zheng anything as she went in. Gu Zheng knocked on the door several times before it was opened. The person who opened the door was a young and beautiful woman. Gu Zheng recognized her as Cheng Lei. According to seniority, she should call her aunt. But Cheng Lei was a few years younger than her. She couldn't bring herself to say it, so she introduced herself. "I'm Gu Zheng." Holding a cloth doll in her arms, Cheng Lei leaned against the doorframe as if she had just woken up and hadn't fully shaken off her sleep. She yawned lazily, squinting at Gu Zheng, obviously not recognizing her. Although Gu Xiaole and Cheng Lei had been married for several years, Gu Zheng hadn't met her often. "I'm Gu Xiaolu's niece," she had to add. "Oh, so it's you, the big lawyer." A hint of a smile appeared on Cheng Lei's originally cold face, and then she stepped aside. "Please come in." Cheng Lei wore thick cotton pajamas but still couldn't hide her slender and graceful figure. As she turned and walked into the house, her graceful steps were like those of an actress walking on a stage, possessing an indescribable charm. Gu Zheng was reminded of Liu Jia and of her missing sister-in-law, Meng Fei. Gu Zheng followed her in. This was a 2-bedroom house. The living room wasn't big. In the middle was a square table piled with snacks and bowls of leftover food from what was probably last night's meal. An old black coach leaned against the wall as if it had been bought from a second-hand furniture market, and its style looked outdated. The floor was painted with a layer of dark red paint, and over time the paint had peeled off in many places, revealing mottled cement. Everything looked so messy, like the dormitory of a single man who never cleaned, very out of sync with the image of the beautiful woman in front of her. Gu Zheng thought that Cheng Lei was only back here temporarily and that the real owner of the house was her father, and felt relieved. Seeing Gu Zheng looking around the house, Cheng Lei didn't care, as if this weren't her home but a hotel. "It's very dirty. Sit wherever you want." Gu Zheng pushed aside a pile of clothes on the couch, sat down and asked casually, "Your father's not home?" "He's been taking care of that old geezer since the first day of the new year and hasn't returned," Cheng Lei said unhappily. "Old geezer?" Gu Zheng thought Cheng Lei was talking about her mother, but what Cheng Lei said next surprised her. "His cellmate from when he was in prison. By the way, did you know that my dad used to be in prison?" "Oh, I haven't heard of that," Gu Zheng stammered. In fact, she had heard her maternal grandparents mention it before, but it wasn't something to be proud of, so she lied to avoid embarrassing Cheng Lei. "After my dad got out, he became very close to that old man. Usually, besides trading stocks, he runs off to his place. The old man got sick not long ago, and he takes care of him every day like he's his own relative," Cheng Lei said, as if she had been holding her breath and had finally found a chance to vent. Gu Zheng could hear Cheng Lei's strong dissatisfaction with her father. She didn't know what to say about her complicated family history, which she had heard from her maternal grandparents. She had to interrupt her. "That's right. I just came from visiting Uncle at the detention center." "I know you went to see Gu Xiaolu," Cheng Lei interrupted Gu Zheng before she could finish speaking. "Did he ask you to find me? Otherwise, why would a big lawyer niece like you come looking for me?" Cheng Lei's voice was obviously sarcastic, making Gu Zheng realize that her dissatisfaction wasn't just with her father, but also with her husband, Gu Xiaolu. "What happened to Uncle may not be as bad as you imagine," Gu Zheng said, trying to control her emotions in a comforting tone. Besides, his starting point wasn't that wrong. "Starting point? Wasn't that wrong?" Cheng Lei sneered, as if questioning her. "Are you saying that Gu Xiaolu is still a hero?" "I didn't mean that." "You didn't mean that, but Gu Xiaolu and his mentor Ah Mao meant that too. They always thought they were defending the interests of the Donggang workers. Otherwise, how would they have done such earth-shattering things?" Cheng Lei said dismissively. "He plays the hero to defend other people's interests, but when his own wife was kicked out of the cultural troupe, he didn't even dare to fart." As Cheng Lei spoke, she laughed hysterically with vague tears in her eyes. Gu Zheng knew that Cheng Lei used to be an actress in the Donggang cultural troupe and that she had been laid off a few years ago, but she didn't know the specific reasons. Hearing Cheng Lei's words at that moment, she seemed to understand why she was angry with Gu Xiaole. "Uncle asked me to come and see you because he wants to tell you that he cares about you very much," Gu Zheng said. Even she was a little surprised by her own words. Gu Xiaolu hadn't asked her to say this. Based on her feeling that Gu Xiaolu had asked her to find Cheng Lei to convey this meaning, she was just guessing. "Everything will be all right. Don't worry about him." "What can I do if I'm worried? No matter their purpose, he and Ah Mao caused a death. They can thank their lucky stars if they don't get sentenced to death." Cheng Lei wiped away the tears from the corner of her eyes and said, "A couple is like birds in the same forest. When disaster strikes, they fly off in different directions. Besides, I've been laid off, and now I can only rely on dancing in a nightclub to make a living. How can I take care of his affairs?" After Cheng Lei finished speaking, she smiled miserably. Gu Zheng couldn't help but feel a little pity for her. The two of them said a few more words. Gu Zheng had to go to the procuratorate in the afternoon to find out about the progress of Gu Xiaolu's case, so she got up to leave. Cheng Lei walked her to the door, then suddenly grabbed her hand and said, "You're a lawyer. Gu Xiaolu's affairs can only depend on you to help." Hearing this, Gu Zheng's heart stirred. She thought she still loved Uncle after all. She suddenly remembered the turquoise stone that her uncle had stuffed into her hand, so she took it out and put it into Cheng Lei's hand. Without looking at her reaction, she turned and left. 4. Cheng Lei and her father. After Gu Zheng left, Cheng Lei closed the door. As if afraid it would shatter if dropped, she carefully clutched the heart-shaped turquoise stone, walked to the sofa in the living room and, as if completing a complicated dance movement, first knelt down, then bent her upper body, slowly burying her entire face in the sofa. The sofa exuded the foul smell of cheap synthetic leather, but she seemed to have lost her sense of smell. She lay on the couch and sobbed softly. At first, she was afraid of being heard and desperately tried to restrain herself, but the sobs grew louder and louder, gradually turning into a wail. Her entire body trembled. Cheng Lei and Gu Xiaolu started dating while studying at Dongjiang Iron and Steel College. At the time, she had just been admitted to the secondary vocational class of the art program at Donggang College, while Gu Xiaolu was 2 years her senior and was about to graduate. That year, the school held an evening gala to commemorate the 70th anniversary of the May 4th movement. Cheng Lei performed a duet dance. A few days later, she received a letter. The letter was short and to the point, saying that after seeing the program, he thought her dance was beautiful, and she was beautiful too. "I have never seen such a beautiful girl as you. I have fallen in love with you." Enclosed with the letter was a poem entitled Goddess Peak. Rather than exhibiting for 1,000 years on a cliff / it is better to cry a single night on the shoulder of a lover. Cheng Lei stared blankly at the crooked signature at the end of the letter. Metallurgy Major, Gu Xiaolu. The letter also included a color photograph. The boy in the picture was handsome, with clear features. She realized then that it was a love letter. She had received love letters from boys in middle school, but never paid them attention. She didn't understand poetry either, but for some reason, this particular poem attracted her like magic. So much so that she answered the letter as if possessed and agreed to meet him. She had agreed to meet him to return the photograph and the poem to its owner. However, when she met the boy next to the artificial hill at the school library, she changed her mind because of one sentence. When she returned the photograph and the poem to Gu Xiaolu, she casually asked who had written the poem. Gu Xiaolu smiled shyly and said embarrassedly, "I don't know. I copied it from my niece's notebook." Cheng Lei was a little curious. "Your niece? How old is she to understand poetry?" Gu Xiaolu said, "She's 2 years older than me and studying at Dongjiang University." Cheng Lei burst out laughing. It was the first time she had met someone whose niece was older than him. She thought the boy was really interesting and quite honest. "I thought you wrote it." From then on, Cheng Lei began dating Gu Xiaolu. But it was just a casual relationship, not really love. Cheng Lei didn't think that Gu Xiaolu was the type she liked. The boy she liked didn't have to be very handsome, but he had to be strong, able to handle the world, able to withstand storms, and able to shelter her from the wind and rain like her father. Gu Xiaolu was clearly not that type. Cheng Lei was not even a year old when her father divorced her mother. She had grown up relying on her mother. She had always felt insecure since childhood because she lacked a father's love. Her mother didn't have a formal job and worked in a sewing factory belonging to Donggang. She would bring the unfinished sewing work home after work every day and continue working at night to earn more money. When she was a child, whenever she woke up in the middle of the night, she would see her mother bent over the sewing machine, her shadow cast on the wall by the light, sometimes long, sometimes short. The rhythmic sound of the sewing machine sounded like a beautiful song. Once, her mother fell ill and didn't go to work for several days. By then, Cheng Lei was already in elementary school. One day, when she came home from school, she saw another person in the house. It was a man with a handsome, square face, wearing a gray cadre suit with 2 pens in his pocket. He looked like a cadre. As soon as he saw her, he greeted her with a beaming smile, took a bag of tangerines out of his briefcase, and stuffed it into her arms. Because no man had ever come to her house before, Cheng Lei was very scared and hid beside her mother with a terrified expression, burying her head in her mother's arms and not daring to look up. But her mother raised her head, pointed to the man, and said, "Lei, take it. He is your father." Hearing this sentence, Cheng Lei felt like she had been struck by lightning and couldn't say a word for a long time. Until the man left, her mother said softly, "Lei, he's leaving. Call him Dad once." But she still bit her lip and didn't speak. It wasn't until the man had left that she threw herself into her mother's arms and cried loudly. Soon, Cheng Lei heard her classmates at school say, "Cheng Lei, your father is in jail. Did you know?" Cheng Lei was skeptical. She went back and asked her mother, but her mother said expressionlessly, "That person is not your father. Whether he's in jail or not has nothing to do with you." Cheng Lei was confused, not knowing which of her mother's words were true. It wasn't until she was in the 5th grade of elementary school that she learned that her mother had lied. The man in the Zhongshan suit was her father, named Cheng Guojun, who had been the director of the Revolutionary Committee of Dongjiang Iron and Steel Plant. After divorcing her mother, her father married another woman, who was a member of the Donggang cultural troupe. Cheng Lei had always done poorly in school, but she was beautiful, with natural beauty. Whenever the class or school held cultural activities, the teacher always asked her to participate, and she also had a talent in this regard. She learned to sing and dance as soon as she learned, quickly becoming the backbone of the school's artistic activities. In her 2nd year of high school, Cheng Lei represented the school in the district's secondary school art festival and won first prize. She went home excitedly with the certificate, but when her mother saw it, not only was there no trace of joy on her sick face, but she revealed a worried expression. She also sighed and said, "Alas, you are becoming more and more like him." Cheng Lei knew that the him her mother was referring to was her father. She had seen a photograph hidden at the bottom of her mother's trunk in an album, a still from a Donggang cultural troupe production of The Red Detachment of Women. Cheng Guojun played the character Hong Changqing. So, he had been a member of the Donggang cultural troupe. The woman he had married after divorcing her mother was also a member of the Donggang cultural troupe. Cheng Lei understood why her mother sighed. The gold-plated certificate was not something to be proud of, but also made her feel ashamed. What made Cheng Lei feel even more ashamed was that she found that she looked very much like Cheng Guojun. All along, she had been proud of her beauty and regarded it as her only wealth. But now, this pride had been shattered. After realizing this, she felt very sad, feeling that she had truly become penniless. Not long after Cheng Lei was admitted to the art program at Donggang College, her mother passed away. On Saturday, a week after the start of the 2nd semester of her freshman year, Cheng Lei returned to her female dormitory from practicing in the school gymnasium. The dorm manager called and said that someone was looking for her downstairs. She thought it was Gu Xiaolu again. Since their last meeting, Gu Xiaolu had always found various reasons to date her on holidays or weekends. Even the dorm manager was familiar with him. At first, out of politeness, Cheng Lei had gone out with Gu Xiaolu a few times, but the more times she went out, the more annoyed she became. So whenever she heard the phone call looking for her, she would think it was Gu Xiaolu and refuse without thinking. However, the dorm manager said, "Cheng Lei, the person looking for you is named Cheng Guojun. He said he's your father." Cheng Lei was stunned. "My father?" She held the phone and waited for a long time until the dorm manager hung up, and a buzzing sound came from the phone. She woke up as if from a dream, put down the phone, and ran downstairs. At the dormitory entrance, Cheng Lei saw Cheng Guojun glance at the man who claimed to be her father. He had a shaved head and a stubbly beard, wore a faded blue cloth coat, and his leather shoes were cracked. His eyes were dim, and his expression was dejected. He was completely different from the imposing, heroic Hong Chang-ching in the Red Detachment of Women still, and the middle-aged man who looked like a cadre that Cheng Lei had seen at home a few years ago. As soon as he saw Cheng Lei, Cheng Guojun's dim face suddenly lit up as if coated with wax. He called out in a happy voice that was out of tune with his age, "Lei, it's me. I'm your father." Cheng Lei looked at him coldly without saying a word. She didn't know how to face this strange and familiar man. She wanted to say, "No, you're not my father. I don't have a father." Her lips opened, but she couldn't make a sound. She wanted to turn around and walk away, but couldn't move her feet. Her feet felt like they had been glued with super glue and stuck. She felt her eyes were wet, and something was about to flow out of her eyes, but she desperately held back. Lei, I'm out." Cheng Guojun noticed Cheng Lei's thoughts and said worriedly, "Tomorrow is Sunday. Go home. I'll make you something good to eat." Cheng Lei felt that his voice had a pleading tone, but she didn't agree. Since being admitted to Donggang College, Cheng Lei had been living on campus and had never returned to the tenement building where she and her mother had lived. In her heart, she had no home after her mother died. Cheng Lei suppressed the sadness and resentment in her heart and suddenly turned and ran back to the dormitory. Cheng Guojun called out several times, Lei, but she didn't turn her head back once. 3 years passed in a flash. During these 3 years, Cheng Guojun came to the school to find Cheng Lei several times, but she never went home once. As graduation approached, most of the students in the class had found jobs, and some had even been admitted to the Donggang Cultural Troupe. The cultural troupe had now been renamed the Dongjiang Workers' Art Troupe, which not only performed for Donggang employees, but also often organized commercial performances throughout the province, becoming a regular art troupe. Cheng Lei knew that those few students were the children of Donggang company leaders. Their ability to enter the cultural troupe was not because they were outstanding, but because of their parents' connections. Aside from secretly envying them, she could only sigh that she didn't have the backing of her parents. The graduates left the school one after another. Cheng Lei hadn't found a job yet. She was planning to work as a dancer in a nightclub while working and looking for a job when she suddenly received a strange call. The other party identified himself as being from the personnel section of the Workers' Art Troupe and asked her to come over. She was surprised and didn't know what they wanted to see her about. The Workers' Art Troupe wasn't far from Donggang College. It took less than half an hour to walk there. Cheng Lei couldn't figure out why the people from the art troupe were looking for her even as she walked through the gate. In the personnel section, a middle-aged man with a kind face who looked a bit like Zhao Benshan received Cheng Lei. "My surname is Yue, and I'm the head of the personnel section." While introducing himself, he sized her up with a probing look. "You're Cheng Lei?" His tone suggested that he didn't believe she was Cheng Lei herself. Cheng Lei was a little nervous. She took out her student ID to show Director Yue, but he waved his hand and changed his tone, asking, "What is your father's relationship with our Director Lan?" Cheng Lei was even more confused, looking at Director Yue blankly, not knowing how to answer. Director Yue saw this, shook his head and mumbled something. He then took out a stack of forms from the drawer and pushed them in front of Cheng Lei, saying, "Fill out this form." Cheng Lei took the form and looked at it. It was actually a registration form for joining the Dongjiang Workers' Art Troupe. She couldn't believe her eyes, so she read it over and over again until she was convinced that she had not misread it. An immense joy caused her to burst into tears while holding the form. Soon, Cheng Lei officially became an actress with the Dongjiang Workers' Art Troupe. About 2 months later, she was rehearsing a new program when she heard her colleagues say someone was looking for her. She walked out of the rehearsal hall and saw Cheng Guojun. After not seeing him for a while, his energy and clothing were much more decent than before. The new leather shoes on his feet were polished brightly, and he was carrying a briefcase under his arm, looking like a boss. "We don't have to live in the tenement building anymore. I bought an apartment." As soon as Cheng Guojun saw Cheng Lei, he said in a proud tone, and the dejected expression he had before was gone from his face, "Lei, come and take a look with me." This time, Cheng Lei didn't refuse, but obediently followed Cheng Guojun into a taxi. On the way, Cheng Lei couldn't help but ask curiously, "You bought an apartment. Where did you get the money?" "Trading stocks," Cheng Guojun said. "When I was in prison, I read books on trading stocks when I had nothing to do. I didn't expect them to come in handy after I got out. I actually made enough money for an apartment in less than 3 years." Hearing Cheng Guojun's not-so-unhappy words, Cheng Lei felt like she was dreaming. Cheng Guojun sat in the front passenger seat, and she sat in the back seat. Looking at Cheng Guojun's already sparse back of his head, the question that had been suppressed in her heart for a long time finally came out of her mouth. "Did you ask someone to help me? Get into the art troupe?" "Yes, it was I who asked Director Lan for help," Cheng Guojun answered hesitantly. "When I was the director of the Donggang Revolutionary Committee, I saved Director Lan's life. This time she recruited you into the art troupe, which can also be regarded as repaying me for saving her life." Cheng Guojun said it very plainly, but Cheng Lei's eyes were moist after hearing it. 5. Dream and reality. After Gu Zheng left, Cheng Lei returned to the bedroom and cried for a while longer. Later, she fell asleep without realizing it. She dreamed that she and Gu Xiaole were watching a movie together when suddenly a brightly colored tiger jumped down from the screen and rushed into the audience. The audience scattered in panic. She and Gu Xiaole also ran out of the movie theater with the crowd, but as they ran, Gu Xiaole disappeared. She was left alone in the movie theater. The brightly colored tiger opened its bloody mouth and lunged at her, but her feet felt as if they were glued to the ground, unable to move. Just as the tiger was about to pounce on her, it suddenly stopped and said, "Don't be afraid. I won't hurt you. I'm here to protect you." As it spoke, it reached out its front paw and took her hand, its gentle movements like a tender and considerate man. She was moved and involuntarily buried her face in the tiger's embrace. After a while, she raised her face, only to find that the brightly colored tiger had turned into a person, someone she knew, Chu Dongliang. She screamed for help in fright, struggling desperately as she called out. At that moment, Cheng Lei woke up in a cold sweat. The scene in the dream was vivid, as if it weren't a dream, but something that had really happened. She was in a daze, and the scene that had happened a few years ago floated into her mind. After the performance at the Donggang Theater that day, Cheng Lei was removing her makeup backstage when Zhen Bicheng, the new director of the art troupe, walked over and said in a low voice, "Xiao Cheng, after you're done removing your makeup, come have a late-night snack with me." She asked who else would be there. Zhen Bicheng said vaguely, "The company's leaders." He added, "What, are you unwilling?" She didn't ask any further. When she came out after removing her makeup, Zhen Bicheng had already parked the car at the theater's back door. Before Zhen Bicheng had replaced the retiring director Lan as the director of the art troupe, he had been a secretary in the company's party office. He was young and vigorous, and he acted rather domineeringly. The art troupe only had one Santana sedan, which he usually used alone, effectively making it his personal car. Cheng could drive himself. During the day, the driver drove him for official business, but he would send the driver home and drive himself for private activities at night. That night, Cheng Lei sat in the back seat of the Santana, and Cheng took her from the theater to the lakeside bar in the center of the city. The lakeside bar had only been open for a short time. Its appearance was inconspicuous, but it was one of the most high-end bars in Dajiang City. Cheng Lei had heard female colleagues in the troupe say that director Chen had taken them there to drink. A bottle of foreign wine costed as much as tens of thousands of yuan. Those who could afford to spend money there were certainly not ordinary people. Director Chen is indeed worthy of having been Secretary Q's secretary. The people he associates with are extraordinary. Our troupe's business is getting better, and it's all thanks to him. Her colleague's tone was somewhat ambiguous. The Secretary Q they were talking about was Chu Dongliang, the party secretary of Donggang Company. He was in charge of the art troupe. Every year after the Donggang Spring Festival evening gala, Secretary Chu would go on stage to meet all the cast and crew. He had also visited the art troupe more than once to guide and inspect their work. Everyone was very familiar with him. That night, Cheng Lei followed Director Chen into a private room and saw only one person inside. Short and fat, with a hippopotamus-like mouth, leaning sideways on the sofa like a bag of flour. In his hand, he held a tall wine glass. Cheng Lei recognized him at a glance as Secretary Q. As soon as he saw her, he immediately put down the tall wine glass. His hippopotamus-like mouth almost stretched to his ears, and he patted the sofa next to him with a beaming smile. "Xiao Cheng, come sit down, haha, sit down." Cheng Lei stood there, her body as if frozen. Don't be nervous, Xiao Cheng. I've seen your performances. You dance well and you're beautiful. You have a lot of potential, Secretary Ko spoke with something in his mouth, umming and hehing. At the same time, he stood up and reached out to pull her, but Cheng Lei took a step back instinctively. At the same time, she remembered the rumor she had heard recently. Secretary Chu loved to drink foreign wine, and it was the kind that cost tens of thousands of yuan a bottle. Director Chen often found actresses in the troupe to accompany Secretary Chu to drink. After drinking too much, Secretary Chu would touch them. Several of the sisters in the troupe had been drunk, and then, just as Cheng Lei took half a step back, someone blocked her retreat from behind. It was Director Chen, who advised her with a fake smile. "Xiao Cheng, have a couple of drinks with Secretary Q." Cheng Lei had no choice but to sit down next to Secretary Q. After drinking half a glass of wine, her head began to spin. Director Chen didn't know when he had left. Only she and Secretary Q were left in the private room. "Xiao Cheng, as long as you treat me well, I guarantee you'll have a bright future in the art troupe," Secretary Q said stutteringly, his mouth full of alcohol. A large, fat hand reached out. Under the light, the hair on the back of his hand was dense and long. She hallucinated as if she were facing not a person but a monkey covered in hair. She felt a wave of nausea. She raised the tall wine glass in her hand and threw it at the hippopotamus-like face that was approaching her. Then she stumbled and ran out of the private room. How many times had this scene been repeated in Cheng Lei's memory? She couldn't remember. The more she tried to forget it, the deeper it stabbed like a needle. Not long after that incident, Cheng Lei was dismissed from the art troupe. When she received the dismissal notice, many of her colleagues in the troupe spoke out on her behalf, but only Cheng Lei knew the real reason. She didn't say anything, enduring the humiliation and leaving without saying a word. When she got home, she locked herself in her bedroom and cried bitterly. At dinner, her parents-in-law called her to eat, but she refused to come out. Gu Xiaolu came home from work and asked her what had happened. She haltingly told her husband the cause and effect. She hoped that her husband could act like a real man and find find that hippopotamus secretary to get an explanation for the humiliation his wife had suffered. But after Gu Xiaolu heard it, he said with a frustrated expression,
The art troupe is originally the harem of those officials. Isn't it their pleasure to play with whomever they want? If you don't want to do it, don't. As long as I can keep my job, I can support you."
At that moment, Cheng Lei was extremely disappointed. At that time, Donggang was undergoing restructuring. In the name of reducing staff and increasing efficiency, it laid off thousands of workers and cadres at once. Who was laid off and who wasn't was in the hands of the hippopotamus secretary. Cheng Lei knew that her husband didn't have the courage to find the hippopotamus secretary. She regretted marrying Gu Xiaolu a little. Ultimately, Gu Xiaolu was too weak, just like his appearance, not the kind of man who could protect her. The sound of a key turning in the lock and footsteps came from outside. It was her father, Cheng Guojun, who had returned. After a while, the sound of a knife chopping, dishes clashing, and water flowing came from the kitchen. Cheng Lei knew that her father was cooking. Since the first day of the Lunar New Year, when her father had gone to take care of that old geezer, Cheng Lei had been eating leftovers from the reunion dinner they had had a few days ago. She lay on the bed without moving and fell asleep again groggily. She didn't know how long had passed before a knock on the door awakened Cheng Lei. "Lei, dinner is ready. Get up and eat." She reluctantly got out of bed. Several bowls of dishes were laid out on the table. They were all cooked food and cured meat prepared before the new year. The large casserole in the middle contained a stewed local chicken that had just been made. Her father had made so many dishes, clearly as compensation for leaving her alone at home these past few days. Cheng Lei had grown tired of eating leftovers for a few days. Seeing the table full of good dishes, she couldn't help but have her appetite whetted. She picked up her chopsticks and picked up a chicken leg from the casserole, opening her mouth to gnaw on it. "Wait a moment, Lei. Dad left you alone at home these past few days for the new year," Cheng Guojun said apologetically, taking out a bottle of red wine from the kitchen and shaking it before her. "Drink some wine." Cheng Lei felt a nearly ingratiating tone in Cheng Guojun's voice. For some time, the thick wall erected between her and her father had gradually disappeared. She began to think of this place as her own home. Every time she and Gu Xiaolu quarreled and returned here, her father was always very considerate to her. She had experienced the meaning of a father's love is like a mountain. Someone came to the house? Hearing her father's words, Cheng Lei's thoughts returned to reality. Gu Zheng came over this morning. Gu Zheng? Gu Xiaolu's niece, Cheng Lei said, adding, "She's a lawyer and just went to the detention center." Cheng Guojun grunted and frowned, saying, "The Donggang riot not only beat the Duku Company representative to death, but also seriously injured Chu Dongliang. Xiaolu has stirred up a hornet's nest this time." "Chu Dongliang was also injured?" Cheng Lei asked in disbelief. "Where did you hear that from?" "I came back from Old Luo's and went to the securities company on the way," Cheng Guojun said. Old Luo was that old geezer. Today is the first day the stock market has opened after the Spring Festival holiday. The business hall was crowded with stockholders. Everyone was discussing the riot in front of the Donggang building 2 days before New Year's Eve. Some people even said that Xiaolu injured Chu Dongliang. I don't believe it. Xiaolu usually doesn't even dare to kill a chicken at home. How would he dare to beat someone like that? As he spoke, he looked at Cheng Lei's reaction, afraid of saying something wrong. Hearing her father's words, Cheng Lei's heart stirred. Did Gu Xiaolu really injure Chu Dongliang? Could it be that her husband had taken the opportunity to avenge her humiliation and dismissal by Chu Dongliang? If so, he could still be considered a man of blood, and she had wronged her husband. Cheng Lei's heart was like a storm rising 3 feet high, never to be calmed down again. She recalled what Gu Zheng had said when she came this morning. "Uncle cares about you very much," and also recalled that since she had gone to work at the White Rose Grand Hotel nightclub, her husband had bought a motorcycle, ostensibly to earn extra money by picking up passengers, but actually to pick her up at night. She suddenly felt that she had been too indifferent to Gu Xiaolu. Not only had she not visited him at the detention center these days since he had been arrested, but she hadn't even called her parents-in-law to wish them a happy New Year on New Year's Day. She couldn't help but feel some guilt in her heart. Xiaole had ended up in this situation for her sake. She couldn't be indifferent. Cheng said coquettishly, thinking this way, "Dad, you can't ignore Xiaolu's affairs." Cheng had never spoken to her father this way before. Cheng Guojun was a little surprised. His gaze lingered on his daughter's face for more than 10 seconds, and he smiled slyly. "Haven't you been making a fuss about divorcing Xiaole? How come you care about him now?" "Dad, don't deliberately make me angry. Just tell me, will you take care of Xiaole or not?" Cheng pouted, pretending to be angry. "Don't forget you were the one who persuaded me not to marry Xiaole, saying that his dad was your mentor when you were a worker at Donggang, saying that your mentor was upright, selfless, and the person you respected most in your life. It was as if I weren't marrying Xiaole, but his dad. You can't ignore it now that Xiaole has gotten into trouble." "Do you think your dad is still the director of the Revolutionary Committee?" Cheng Guojun, seeing his daughter's serious expression, smiled wryly. The dejected, even decadent expression appeared on his face again. Still, then he said to himself, "However, I saw a news item in today's evening paper at the Securities Business Department. Duku Company's China General Director Bai Wen, accompanied by his wife, Ms. Song Xiaofan, has arrived in Dongjiang and is inspecting Donggang Company, discussing merger matters with relevant parties. This may be an opportunity." As he spoke, he turned his gaze to Cheng Lei. "Lei, do you know who Song Xiaofan is?" "Who is she?" Cheng Lei was stunned. She was an educated youth in Niangzhu Lake and later entered the Donggang Cultural Troupe. I personally recruited her. After your mother and I divorced, I married her. Later, we divorced, and then she became a famous female writer and went to the United States, Cheng Guojun said, turning his gaze to the side, pondering. "I may be able to go find her about Xiaolu's affairs." Listening to her father's words, Cheng Lei couldn't help but think of her mother, who had been dead for many years. A shadow flashed across her heart. After a while, she changed the topic. "Uncle Luo, is he better?" "Why don't you call him Old Geezer anymore?" Cheng Guojun was apparently a little surprised by his daughter's change of heart and said half-jokingly. Cheng Lei smiled embarrassedly and said, "I just don't understand why you are kinder to an old man with no blood ties than your own family." Cheng Guojun pondered for a moment and said, "Let me tell you this. Old Luo saved my life. If it weren't for him, your dad would have died in prison a long time ago." Cheng Lei saw that her father's expression was a little serious when he said this. To dispel the suffocating atmosphere, she raised her glass and said to her father, "Dad, I'll toast you." "Lei, this is the first time you've toasted me," Cheng Guojun said happily, raising his glass. The father and daughter's glasses clinked loudly. Seeing the way her father's face was flushed with a happy red glow as if he were drunk, Cheng Lei's heart was also filled with an unprecedented joy, but she was still a little doubtful. Would her father really find his ex-wife, Song Xiaofan, for the sake of Xiaolu? Chapter 6, 1. New Marshall Plan. With her husband Bai Wen, Song Xiaofan returned to Dongjiang, receiving a high level of reception. Not only were the leaders of Dongjiang Steel Company with them throughout, but the provincial government leaders also hosted a banquet for the couple. Among those attending the banquet were Executive Deputy Governor Yu and the newly appointed Provincial Party Committee member and Minister of Propaganda, Lang Tao. Song Xiaofan's first meeting with Deputy Governor Yu was her first time, but Lang Tao was an old friend. The last time they met, Lang Tao was still the deputy minister of the provincial propaganda department. Now he had risen to the ranks of provincial leadership, and Song Xiaofan felt a sense of pride. Lang Tao's swift promotion was due not only to his talents and international background, but also somewhat to his relationship with her father, Song Qiankun. Lang Tao seemed to understand this well. Before the banquet began, he even came to the hotel to visit Song Xiaofan and her husband Bai Wen. However, she didn't believe Lang Tao's actions were purely out of personal friendship, just as her trip to Dongjiang with Bai Wen wasn't merely a visit home. Bai Wen had come specifically to handle the aftermath of the Dongjiang steel unrest. Half a year ago, Bai Wen was appointed as the Chief Executive Officer of Duku Company's China operations, based in Los Angeles. The acquisition of Dongjiang Steel was his first major project, which was crucial to Duku Company's strategic plan in China for the next decade. However, at this critical juncture, a negotiating representative was brutally killed by Dongjiang Steel workers, forcing Bai Wen to leave another ongoing acquisition project to handle the situation in Dongjiang personally. Before leaving, Bai Wen asked Song Xiaofan if she wanted to join him, which surprised her. When Bai Wen first took up his position in Beijing half a year ago, Du Wei had invited Song Xiaofan to Dongjiang to see the completed art village villas on Phoenix Island. She had considered taking the opportunity to bring Bai Wen along to meet her parents, but he declined, citing his busy schedule as a new CEO. Song Xiaofan felt down for several days, but eventually she forgave him, understanding that although Bai Wen was also Chinese, he was born in Taiwan and raised in the United States, not adhering strictly to Chinese customs. Bai Wen had always been considerate towards her, never forgetting to give her a bouquet of roses on their wedding anniversary and wearing his formal tails for special occasions to take her to the best local restaurant for authentic Italian cuisine and then to the opera or concert. Despite not being accustomed to such Western expressions of affection, Song Xiaofan was touched by his gentlemanly romance and care. She felt fortunate to have Bai Wen making her broken utopia of love a reality, and she almost believed herself to be the happiest woman in the world. However, the haunting memories of her past with Li Xin frequently returned, reminding Song Xiaofan not to lose her economic and personal independence despite her relationship with Bai Wen. Since marrying Bai Wen, she had lived a privileged life, his high executive salary at Microsoft ensuring her lifelong comfort without any livelihood concerns. Yet, over time, she grew bored and felt like a caged bird, longing to write again, but her mind often went blank whenever she picked up a pen, sometimes sitting at her desk for hours without writing a single word. She feared that she would become a useless person if this continued. Under these circumstances, Song Xiaofan left the United States and returned to China. Bai Wen initially opposed her decision but eventually gave in. After she returned to China, Bai Wen called her almost daily, often talking for hours. Once, he even recited her favorite poem by Pitofi, I Would Like, in English, over the phone. I would like to be the rapids, rivers in the mountains, on the rugged mountain road. Pass on the rocks, as long as my lover. It is a small fish, in my waves, swim around happily. Despite knowing the poem by heart, hearing Bai Wen recite it in English over the phone moved her deeply. In those moments, Bai Wen seemed less like a middle-aged man who had been married for years and more like a newlywed. She thought of her favorite author, Virginia Woolf, and the protagonist of To the Lighthouse, feeling like a happy woman again. So, when Bai Wen told her over the phone that he had resigned from Microsoft and joined the renowned Duku Company as Chief Executive Officer for China, preparing to move to Beijing, her first thought was that her husband had come to China for love, to end their long-distance marriage and reunite with her. After Bai Wen moved to Beijing, Song Xiaofan felt this way initially. The apartment she bought in Wangjing was small but warmly decorated, which Bai Wen admired, especially the bedroom, which was styled exactly like their home in Los Angeles. Once, after making love, Bai Wen kissed her and murmured, Fan, you are even better in bed here than in our Los Angeles home. Blushing like a newlywed, Song Xiaofan couldn't help but feel a little shy. After their marriage, Bai Wen was transferred from Microsoft's headquarters in Seattle to the Los Angeles branch, and their marital home was in the affluent eastern part of Los Angeles. Though it wasn't as luxurious as those of superstars like Tom Cruise, it was still a 2-story villa with front and rear gardens and beautiful scenery. However, Song Xiaofan lived there for less than 2 years before returning to China. Now, after a long period of separation, they had a new home again, and Song Xiaofan felt a sense of security as if a plane had landed. She assumed that her husband would stay with her, but after formally taking up his position, Bai Wen quickly became busy with work, frequently flying across the country. Even in Beijing, he often worked late or didn't come home. Duku Company's China division rented an entire floor of the Great Wall Hotel. Besides his CEO office, Bai Wen had a bedroom for afternoon naps, where he often stayed overnight to save time, hardly returning to Wang Jing's home. Song Xiaofan felt like she had returned to their previous state of long-distance separation, with a sense of estrangement creeping back. She grew even more disheartened when Bai Wen declined to visit her parents in Dajiang, leaving her feeling gloomy for several days. She suddenly realized that in Bai Wen's mind, she was far less important than his position as CEO. Once, Bai Wen proudly told her that Duku Company offered him twice the salary he received at Microsoft. While this didn't surprise her, since salary, like position, is a symbol of status, it was difficult for her to accept that shortly after arriving in Beijing, Bai Wen asked to meet her cousin Tai Hong. She had never mentioned her cousin to Bai Wen before. "How do you know about my cousin?" she asked, surprised. "I not only know your cousin, but also know his father, General Hong Hu," Bai Wen replied cryptically, smiling at her astonishment. "Fan, don't forget that my father was a military intelligence specialist in Taiwan before the nationalists withdrew from the mainland. He was a major general in the Bureau of Investigation." He paused, then said, "To be honest, Duku Company offered me this position not only because of my role as the Director of Economic Intelligence at Microsoft, but also because of my family background and your social connections in China. Duku Company excels in gathering economic strategic intelligence, so they've remained among the world's top 500 companies for decades." It was their 5th wedding anniversary. Song Xiaofan cooked several hometown dishes from Dongjiang. At the same time, Bai Wen brought out a bottle of 30-year-old Bordeaux wine he had bought during a business trip to France with Bill Gates, which he had saved until now to celebrate their anniversary. She wasn't sure if Bai Wen was telling the truth, but he had a way of sweet-talking women like many Taiwanese men. Women from the mainland who moved to the U.S. called them milk cowboys because of their syrupy flattery. Bai Wen had won her heart with these skills. That day, they drank every last drop of the 30-year-old Bordeaux wine. Song Xiaofan, who had never drunk so much, felt dizzy, laughing and crying uncontrollably. She grabbed her husband's hand and asked, "Wen, did you really come to China for me? For us?" Bai Wen, a year younger than her, looked younger than his age, and for a long time after their marriage, she saw him as her younger brother. She craved his protection, but also felt deeply insecure. This contradictory mindset followed her until she returned to China. Bai Wen, noticing her unease, playfully asked, "Do you want the truth or a lie?" "The truth, of course," she replied, giving him a reproachful look. "Have you been lying to me all along?" "No, it's the truth," Bai Wen said with a cunning smile. "But before I explain why I came to China, I must tell you why I left Microsoft." "You said Duku Company offered you twice the salary," she interrupted. "That's only part of the reason." Bai Wen shook his head, becoming serious. "The real reason is that I wanted to leave Bill Gates." Song Xiaofan couldn't believe her ears. "Why?" she asked. "Because Bill Gates is too great," Bai Wen replied solemnly. "I joined Microsoft after graduating from university and watched Bill Gates transform from an ordinary software engineer to the founder of the world's most renowned computer company, building it into the colossal empire it is today. Gates himself became the world's richest man and the greatest entrepreneur in the world. But because he is so great, I constantly felt like a shadow under his dominance. If I continued working at Microsoft, I would always be his shadow. If a woman doesn't want to live in a man's shadow, how could I, as a man, want to remain in anyone's shadow? To achieve something great, I had to leave Microsoft and Bill Gates. After being married to Bai Wen for so long, it was the first time Song Xiaofan heard her husband talk so seriously about himself. Suddenly, she felt that the usually gentle man had become somewhat unfamiliar. his overly serious expression reminding her of another man, the one in the photo hanging on the wall of the study of their Los Angeles home, Bai Wen's father, a retired lieutenant general of Taiwan's Military Intelligence Bureau and a seasoned intelligence expert. Song Xiaofan had never met her father-in-law. He passed away before she met Bai Wen. According to Bai Wen, his father was writing a memoir about his espionage career before the nationalists retreated from the mainland. This book was published posthumously. Bai Wen once told her, "My father's dying wish was for me to avoid politics." But she could never decipher the hidden meaning behind this wish. Regarding temperament and appearance, Bai Wen seemed worlds apart from his father. But at that moment, she suddenly saw a resemblance between her husband and his father, though she couldn't pinpoint what it was. Just then, Dooku Company extended an olive branch to me, Bai Wen continued. It wasn't the high salary that tempted me to join Dooku Company, but their upcoming New Marshall Plan. New Marshall Plan? Song Xiaofan, who had read the term in Mao's collected works, was astonished to hear it from Bai Wen. New Marshall Plan is an economic aid plan launched by the U.S. after the war against Yugoslavia to control the Middle East situation, prevent Europe from growing stronger, and challenge America's global dominance. The plan involves investing $2 trillion from developed countries and major foreign exchange reserve nations over the next 5 to 10 years, focusing on infrastructure and corporate reconstruction projects in developing countries to stimulate global economic recovery. World-class companies like Dooku will undertake the corporate reconstruction projects. America aims to maintain its global supremacy, while Dooku Company aims to expand its market share globally by participating in the reform of state-owned enterprises in China. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. To illustrate, something that costs $100 in the Western market can be bought for just $1 in China, making it incredibly lucrative. Whoever seizes this opportunity first will gain a significant advantage in global dominance. For Dooku Company, this is a grand plan, and for me personally, it's a chance to build a great career and benefit the world. The beginning is always difficult, my dear. I need your help. Although Song Xiaofan only partially understood the specifics of the New Marshall Plan, she saw the excitement and ambition in Bai Wen's eyes and couldn't help but feel moved. From his words, she even vaguely sensed an air of a spy thriller. Having lived in the U.S. for many years, she knew the importance of economic intelligence for both nations and corporations. Therefore, Song Xiaofan didn't refuse her husband's request and took him to see her cousin Hong Tai-hung at the villa near Miyun Reservoir. At that time, their cousin, Hong Yanbei, and her husband Ba Dong joined them. After introducing Bai Wen to Hong Tai-hung, Song Xiaofan and Yanbei boated on the Miyun Reservoir. Thus, she didn't know the details of Bai Wen's meeting with Hong Tai-hung and Ba Dong. Still, she knew that the first successful acquisition of a Chinese company by Dooku Company, the Hurricane Investment Project, was facilitated by her cousin. Therefore, when Bai Wen asked her if she wanted to accompany him to Dongjiang, she reflexively recalled his previous words about intelligence and wondered if her social connections in Dongjiang were also being leveraged. Regardless, as a wife, she felt obligated to support her husband's career. Realizing this, Song Xiaofan felt a bit uneasy. She once again remembered the poem Bai Wen had recited for her. I would like to be a barren forest, on both sides of the river, yeah, a gust of wind, fight bravely, as long as my lover. It is a bird among my dense branches, make a beeping, chirping. But did she really want this? Several times in my dreams. The White Rose Hotel is probably the most upscale hotel in Steel City. Apart from its somewhat clumsy exterior, the decor and facilities meet 5-star standards. The only downside is its proximity to the industrial area. It is less than 2 kilometers away from a slag factory with a tall chimney spewing smoke. The air is filled with the choking smell of coal ash mixed with iron ore. Song Xiaofan and Bai Wen stayed in a more spacious suite than the luxurious business suite they had stayed in at the Sheraton Hotel in the UK. It was Song Xiaofan's first time accompanying Bai Wen on a business trip and also her first time staying in such a luxurious hotel. "Do you always stay in hotels like this? On your business trips?" she asked curiously, omitting the word luxurious from her question. They had traveled lightly all the way from the airport to the White Rose Hotel. The reception staff from Dongjiang Steel Company had completed their check-in procedures before leaving. With his hands habitually in his trousers pockets, Bai Wen surveyed the room critically. Hearing Song Xiaofan's question, he smiled slightly. "Dear, it's not that I want to stay in such hotels. It's a work necessity. Strictly speaking, this hotel doesn't meet my requirements. The environment is too poor, and the exterior too clumsy, like a steel billet fresh from the furnace yet to be polished. However, the name White Rose, taken from Eileen Chang's novel, is quite pleasant. The Dongjiang Steel leader who met us at the airport said this is the best hotel in Steel City. If we want a better one, we'd have to go to the city center, but that would be too inconvenient for work. Like a steel billet fresh from the furnace, yet to be polished." Song Xiaofan detected a hint of disdain in Bai Wen's words. She thought to herself, back when she worked at Dongjiang Steel, there wasn't even a decent guest house in the entire city. When was the White Rose Hotel built? At this moment, she heard Bai Wen say, "Dear, have you called Minister Lang Tao?" "I did. He said he would host a banquet for us," she answered absent-mindedly. "Oh no, it should be for you." "Why just me and not us?" Bai Wen asked. "By Chinese customs, isn't Lang Tao your bosom friend?" Though this was a typical Chinese joke, Song Xiaofan responded seriously. "Lang Tao said the provincial government's reception office is hosting the banquet. He and a vice governor will attend the banquet." "Oh, are you sure it's a vice governor?" Bai Wen frowned. Dongjiang Steel is one of the largest state-owned enterprises in Dongjiang Province, and Duku is a Fortune 500 company. When I first came to Dongjiang to sign a cooperation agreement with Dongjiang Steel, the governor himself received me. This time, they only arranged for a vice governor to attend. What does this indicate? Song Xiaofan thought Bai Wen was asking her, so she quickly shook her head. "I don't know. How would I know? But I heard it's the executive vice governor, which is almost the same as the governor, right?" Bai Wen waved his hand. No, you don't understand the mainland, especially officialdom. The rank of an official is very important. Even half a level higher or lower makes a huge difference. He paced the room, speaking to himself. This could indicate that the Dongjiang Steel unrest has caused a change in Dongjiang's attitude toward the acquisition project. Hearing Bai Wen's words, Song Xiaofan was a bit surprised. He had been in mainland China for less than a year and was already familiar with the rules of officialdom to this extent. It seemed he had indeed put in considerable effort. Seeing her husband's anxious expression, she felt a little uneasy too. "Maybe, but don't speculate. Minister Lang Tao is coming to visit us soon. You can ask him directly then." Maybe her words had an effect, as Bai Wen's anxious expression softened. A pot of lucky bamboo by the window exuded a refreshing fragrance. The fruit plate on the coffee table held several bunches of glistening grapes, each looking as if it had just been plucked from the vine. Song Xiaofan picked one, and as soon as it entered her mouth, it turned into sweet juice. She picked another and offered it to Bai Wen, but he kept his mouth closed, seemingly still deep in thought. Feeling tired from the journey, Song Xiaofan felt a bit sleepy. She glanced at the clock. There was still over an hour before the appointed time with Lang Tao. She told Bai Wen, "I'm going to rest for a while. Waka me up when Lang Tao arrives," and then headed to the bedroom. Lying in bed for a while, she couldn't fall asleep, whether due to the noise outside or the overly soft mattress. She had mild lumbar disc herniation, a professional ailment from years of writing, and was not used to sleeping on soft beds. Whether in their Los Angeles home, in Beijing, or back in Dongjiang, she always bought an extra firm mattress to place over the bed. Bai Wen, although preferring soft beds, had to compromise and sleep on the hard mattress with her. She initially felt a bit guilty about this, but eventually got used to it. Now she knew it wasn't the bed keeping her awake. She had felt drowsy earlier, but now, alone in the bedroom, she was wide awake, her mind clearer than ever. Her ears, mind, and even her sense of smell seemed highly sensitive, like a radar. Though the thick velvet curtains blocked the outside light, she could still feel the sunlight caressing her face and body warmly and brightly, and the mixed smell of coal ash and iron ore in the air made her feel particularly nostalgic. She imagined herself dressed in an olive-green military uniform, custom-fitted to her waist, without any insignias or badges, which was the most popular outfit among the educated youth. Buying this set without insignias cost her a month's living expenses. She was 20 then, with 2 black braids, her face glowing with youthful energy, and her eyes holding a faint trace of melancholy. Compared to the naive young girl who had gone to the Niangzhu lake countryside for re-education a few years earlier, she now carried a hint of maturity. By then, she had been recruited into Dongjiang Steel's art troupe, and all new members had to first train in the factory. With her were 10 other young people who joined the troupe simultaneously, including artists, actors, a cellist, and a trumpeter, all educated youth. They trained for 6 months in the slag factory, the most arduous and dangerous job at Dongjiang Steel. They worked alongside workers, dealing with iron ore daily, growing darker and thinner after months. When their training ended, a factory leader came to see them. The leader, Director Cheng of the Factory Revolutionary Committee, was about 30, of medium height, with a square face and long eyebrows almost reaching his temples. He somewhat resembled a movie star, dressed in a faded old military uniform, looking simple. He approached the group, grabbed a young man's hand, and examined it carefully, like an old Chinese doctor diagnosing a patient. He checked several hands, occasionally mumbling approval. When he reached Song Xiaofan, he didn't check her hand but stared at her face for a moment before jumping onto a pile of slag, striking a heroic pose, one hand on his waist, the other waving powerfully in the air. He said,
"I just examined everyone's hands. They all have thick calluses. Your faces are tanned. These are your graduation certificates and transcripts. Comrades, I'm proud of you. Now you're returning to the art troupe. With this graduation certificate, I believe you will follow Chairman Mao's teachings to serve the workers, peasants, and soldiers with your art, vividly portraying the spirit of our Dongjiang steel workers. His voice was loud and strong, with an undeniable appeal and charisma. A cellist whispered in her ear, "This director Cheng is remarkable. During the Cultural Revolution, he was the first to post big character posters denouncing the factory leaders. During the Three-Way Alliance, he became the director of Dongjiang's Revolutionary Committee and a provincial committee member. I heard he used to be in the art troupe, too, playing Hong Changqing in The Red Detachment of Women," Song Xiaofan lightly replied, thinking, no wonder. After Cheng Guojun's speech, they gave impromptu performances. Someone suggested, "Director Cheng, why don't you perform for us?" Cheng Guojun hesitated briefly, then said, "All right, but as a professional artist, I fear I may make a fool of myself. I'll recite a poem for you." He cleared his throat and recited He Jingji's Return to Yan'an. "My heart, don't beat so fiercely. Dust, don't block my eyes. I grab the yellow earth and won't let go, holding it tightly to my chest. Several times in my dreams, I return to Yan'an." At some point, Song Xiaofan fell into a deep sleep. When she woke up, more than 2 hours had passed. She immediately remembered Lang Tao's visit and got out of bed. Opening the bedroom door, she saw Bai Wen alone in the living room. She asked, "Where's Lang Tao? Hasn't he come yet?" Bai Wen was holding the Motorola phone, speaking in a low voice, covering the mouthpiece with his hand as if to prevent her from hearing. After 2 more minutes, he ended the call and finally addressed her. "Minister Lang came by earlier and just left. I wanted to wake you, but he insisted you rest more since you'll meet at the reception banquet anyway. Your dear friend is quite considerate of you." There was a hint of jealousy in Bai Wen's tone.
Song Xiaofan ignored it, knowing his primary concern was whether the unrest would affect the acquisition project of Duku Company and Dongjiang Steel. She asked, "How did your conversation go?" "Your dear friend is quite cautious and didn't reveal any information," Baiwen shrugged. "However, he did tell me why the governor won't be attending the reception banquet." "Why not?" "It's not due to the unrest at Dongjiang Steel. The new provincial party secretary hasn't officially taken office, and acting Governor Luo is reluctant to take on responsibilities, so he delegated Deputy Governor Yu to attend," Baiwen explained, smiling understandingly. "Although I've been in mainland China for a short time, I'm somewhat familiar with the rules of the Communist Party. The party secretary holds more power than the administrative head. Therefore, the decision on the acquisition project of Dongjiang Steel will likely wait until the new provincial party secretary officially takes office." Seeing Baiwen's unease, Song Xiaofan was about to say something when he glanced at her and said, "Do you know who I was just talking to?" "Who?" "Your cousin, Hong Tai-hung," Baiwen replied. "He informed me that the incoming provincial party secretary is named Chen Yiming." The name sounded familiar to Song Xiaofan, but she couldn't immediately recall where she had heard it before. Noticing the relief on Baiwen's face upon mentioning the name, she became curious. Before she could ask more, Baiwen checked the time and reminded her, "It's almost time for the banquet. Get ready. The car Minister Lang sent to take us to the banquet is already waiting at the hotel's entrance." Song Xiaofan nodded and returned to the bedroom. 3. Condolences. Following Donggang's arrangements, Baiwen was scheduled to visit Chu Dongliang, the injured chairman and party secretary of Donggang Group, at the hospital on the morning of the following day. In the afternoon, he would attend the funeral of Lao Yan, the representative of Duku Corporation's Donggang acquisition project, who had been beaten to death in the riot. Deputy Director Guo from the Dongjiang Provincial State-Owned Assets Supervision and Administration Commission, SASAC, a Vitsu president from Donggang, and several local media reporters are accompanying him. Song Xiaofan originally didn't want to participate in such formal events, planning to stay at the hotel to read or take a walk around the city. However, Baiwen insisted that she come along. "Darling, your name is already in the news. It wouldn't be appropriate not to go." He was referring to the headline in the Dongjiang Evening News that the hotel staff had delivered to their room that morning, reporting on the previous night's welcoming banquet. Mr. Bai Wen, Chief Executive Officer of Duku Corporation China, and his wife, Ms. Song Xiaofan, inspect Donggang Group. Provincial leaders Yu Feng, Lang Tao, and others host a welcoming banquet. Hearing this, Song Xiaofan couldn't find a suitable reason to refuse and reluctantly agreed. Chu Dongliang was staying in the Second People's Hospital surgical ward of Dongjiang Province. The room was spacious and occupied only by Chu Dongliang. He was reclining on the bed with his legs crossed, watching television. The television on the wall opposite the bed broadcasted a European Cup soccer match between England and Portugal. Although it was just a replay of yesterday's game, Chu Dongliang was engrossed. When Ronaldo scored a long-range goal, he couldn't help but wave his fist and shout, "Good!" Just then, Bai Wen, Song Xiaofan, and Deputy Director Guo entered the room. Seeing them, Chu Dongliang quickly uncrossed his legs and sat up in bed. "Comrade Dongliang, Chief Executive Bai has made a special trip from Beijing to visit you." Deputy Director Guo stepped forward to shake Chu Dongliang's outstretched hand and introduce him. He had previously served as the deputy party secretary at Donggang, working alongside Chu Dongliang before being transferred to the provincial SASAC before the restructuring. Bai Wen stepped forward, grasped Chu Dongliang's hand, and said, "Secretary Q, you've suffered. On behalf of Duku Corporation and my wife and I extend our sincere condolences and express our respect for your sacrifices in safeguarding the Donggang Group." With that, he gestured to Song Xiaofan, who then presented a bouquet of flowers to Chu Dongliang. At the same time, Bai Wen took out a large envelope containing 10,000 RMB in condolence money and handed it over with both hands. Chu Dongliang nodded his thanks while clumsily accepting the condolence money and flowers. Song Xiaofan noticed that the bedside table next to Chu Dongliang overflowed with flowers and fruit. His fat face gleamed brightly and resembled a red and almost purple-cut watermelon. His movements were agile, showing no signs of ennui or hospitalization. "How is your injury? Is it all right?" Bai Wen asked with concern, looking at the bandages on Chu Dongliang's body. "Oh, I got hit on the head and arm. Nothing serious." Chu Dongliang moved his arms a couple of times. "It's just that, President Yan, it's too unfortunate." Bai Wen looked at him with grief. "Yes, President Yan sacrificed his life to defend the common interests of the Donggang Group and Dooku Corporation. My wife and I are both deeply saddened. We will attend his memorial service this afternoon. President Yan died before he could even accomplish his mission. Donggang Group will posthumously recognize him as a martyr." Chu Dongliang stared with bloodshot eyes, turned his face to Deputy Director Guo, and said with grief and indignation, "Lao Guo, when will the murderers be brought to justice? Otherwise, Lao Yan will not rest in peace." "Lao Q, rest assured, the criminals who murdered President Yan and caused the Donggang riot will be severely punished," Deputy Director Guo said in a comforting tone. "The restructuring of state-owned enterprises is a major decision made by the Central and Provincial Party Committee. No one, no force can stop the pace of reform and opening up." Deputy Director Guo had also attended the welcoming banquet the previous night. His words were similar to Lang Tao's and Vitsu Governor Yu's rhetoric at the banquet, clearly representing the Dongjiang provincial government. Bai Wen quickly echoed, Yes, we also hope this incident will not affect the merger and acquisition process between Dooku Corporation and Donggang Group." Everything resembled a solemn and formulaic scene commonly seen on Chinese television programs. Song Xiaofan never imagined that one day she would play a role in it. She felt like a puppet or a prop. In the afternoon, Song Xiaofan pleaded a headache and didn't accompany Bai Wen to President Yan's memorial service. Having left Donggang decades ago, the Steel City had long become unrecognizable. She planned to wander outside, hoping to find traces of its former style and charm. Just as she was about to leave, the room phone rang. It was the hotel front desk. "Is this Ms. Song? A Mr. Cheng is looking for you." "Mr. Cheng?" During her years at Donggang, Song Xiaofan had made many friends, including colleagues from the cultural troupe, cadres, workers, cafeteria staff, and police officers from the local station, people from all walks of life. But she searched her memory twice and couldn't recall who Mr. Cheng could be. She remembered that the household registration police officer who handled her household registration transfer was named Cheng. Still, she was a woman, about her age, with a long face, wearing a brimless police cap at a slant, revealing a strand of shiny black hair and 2 dimples when she smiled, making her look very cute. "Ms. Song, would you like Mr. Cheng to come to your room, or would you prefer to meet him in the lobby? Or—" the female receptionist patiently solicited her opinion. "I'll come to the lobby," Song Xiaofan said after hesitating. As she walked into the elevator, she was still searching her mind for who Mr. Cheng could be. The moment she stepped out of the elevator, it was as if a flashlight had illuminated her mind, and suddenly a person popped up. Could it be him? Song Xiaofan wasn't sure, but her heart felt like a stirred pond, no longer calm. 4. Visitor. As Song Xiaofan entered the lobby, she immediately spotted a middle-aged man standing near the front desk. He appeared to be around 50 years old, with a square face, a height of about 5 feet 9 inches, and a slightly stooped posture. His skin was dark and thin, and he had about an inch of stubble on his chin. His sparse graying hair was somewhat disheveled. He wore a wrinkled gray suit with a wrinkled tie, revealing a clashing dark red sweater. It was indeed Cheng Guojun, her ex-husband. In an instant, Song Xiaofan's mind went blank, and a storm erupted in her heart. Her body swayed slightly, and she steadied herself by grabbing a nearby pillar. Over the years, she had almost erased this man from her memory, along with those years spent in the Donggang cultural troupe. But now, seeing that face, long-sealed memories suddenly resurfaced. Back then, when Song Xiaofan was recruited from Nyangzihu to join the Donggang cultural troupe, she found Cheng Guojun to be so handsome, heroic, and dashing, like Hong Changqing in the film The Red Detachment of Women. Coincidentally, Cheng Guojun was also a member of the Donggang cultural troupe and even played Hong Changqing in the dance drama The Red Detachment of Women. After the Cultural Revolution broke out, Cheng Guojun became the #1 logistics officer of the Donggang rebels and later became the director of the Donggang Revolutionary Committee. He was a prominent figure not only in Donggang, but throughout Dongjiang province. Song Xiaofan had seen his name in the provincial newspaper when she was an educated youth. Later, her first mini-opera, created in her spare time, won the Provincial Literary and Art Performance Award. Cheng Guojun, representing the factory's revolutionary committee, visited her at the cultural troupe, holding her hand and praising her effusively. "I never thought you could not only dance but also write scripts, a rare talent." He immediately instructed the leaders of the cultural troupe to make her a full-time writer. Later, they fell in love. After that, Cheng Guojun divorced his ex-wife and married her. But less than 2 years later, the Gang of Four collapsed, and Cheng Guojun was labeled as one of the 3 types of people, those who rose to prominence by following the Gang of Four, and stripped of all his positions inside and outside the party, and sentenced to 5 years in prison. Before he went to jail, Song Xiaofan, at the repeated urging of her parents, completed the divorce procedures and transferred out of the Donggang cultural troupe. Scene after scene of past events flashed through Song Xiaofan's mind like a movie. She felt overwhelmed and almost turned around to get back in the elevator and return to her room. "What's wrong with me?" she thought. "Am I still that naive, romantic girl without the courage to face him?" Song Xiaofan thought, "Maybe I once wronged him, but was it solely my fault?" She questioned and defended herself in her heart, as if 2 people were arguing in her mind. After about a minute, when Song Xiaofan walked back towards the lobby, her heart was calm again, and she had a casual expression as if she weren't going to meet her ex-husband, whom she hadn't seen in over 20 years. Still, I would rather go to the beauty salon she frequented weekly for a facial. At this moment, Cheng Guojun also saw Song Xiaofan. He left the front desk, walked towards Song Xiaofan with a smile on his face, extended both hands and called out, "Xiaofan!" "Hello," Song Xiaofan said dismissively, without shaking hands with him, as if she had met a neighbor or a casual colleague while strolling around. Cheng Guojun's hand stopped halfway, hanging down as if broken by the wind, and the smile on his face froze, as if it had been iced over. The 2 stood face to face, silent, and the atmosphere was a bit awkward for a moment. After a while, Song Xiaofan said, "Let me treat you to a cup of coffee." "No, I should treat you," Cheng Guojun stammered, but Song Xiaofan had already turned and walked towards the other end of the lobby. There was a coffee shop on the east side of the lobby, and there were a few people now. They found a place to sit down. Song Xiaofan ordered 2 cups of coffee. Seeing that Cheng Guojun was a little reserved, she casually asked, "Lao Cheng, are you still working at Donggang?" Cheng Guojun smiled bitterly and said, "I'm just a social idler. Where would I get a job?" "No job? Then how do you make a living?" Song Xiaofan seemed a little surprised. Cheng Guojun said, "You might not believe it, but I make a living by trading stocks now. I not only support myself, but I've even earned enough for an apartment." Song Xiaofan saw a trace of pride and even complacency in that familiar but unfamiliar face. Thinking that Cheng Guojun had once been so infinitely glorious, but now could only maintain his livelihood by trading stocks, she felt a daze, and her heart suddenly softened as if she had returned to more than 20 years ago. At that time, she believed that she truly loved this man, that this man was worth loving, and that he embodied all the virtues of a man and an era. For the sake of love, she disregarded that he was married and didn't hesitate to break with her parents. Love required such dedication and forward momentum. This was in line with her character. She once thought that great love should have a quality of being independent of the world, but now it seemed so naive. Although Marx is outdated now, his statement is true. Man is the sum total of all social relations. Love is also like this. For example, if the times hadn't changed, would it have been the way it was later with her and Cheng Guojun? Even now, she couldn't believe that the disheveled, down-on-his-luck and world-weary man in front of her, who was entirely in a different world from her, was the once powerful director of the Revolutionary Committee. Song Xiaofan felt that her thoughts were like a kite with a broken string, floating far, far away and unable to be pulled back. "Xiaofan, you're still so young." She was startled and saw Cheng Guojun staring at her with a somewhat strange expression. She felt slightly uncomfortable, changed the subject, and asked casually, "Lao Cheng, how did you know I was back in Steel City? You're a big celebrity now. Reporters report on you wherever you go." Cheng Guojun smiled and said, "Over the years, I know clearly where you've been when you went to America, when you returned to China, and how many times you've been back to Dongjiang. Also, I have every book you've published, and I've watched the movie Shangchun Street, which was adapted from your novel no less than 10 times. When her work was praised for the first time, a flush of red flashed across Song Xiaofan's face. However, given her current status and Cheng Guojun's experiences, she felt she couldn't let this topic continue. So she interrupted him again. "Lao Cheng, you came to find me. What's the matter?" Cheng Guojun was excitedly talking when the sudden interruption occurred. He was stunned and seemed a little embarrassed. He said, "Oh, and it's like this. I really have something to trouble you with." He stopped talking, looked at Song Xiaofan, and seemed to be trying to figure out her reaction. Song Xiaofan avoided his gaze, picked up a small spoon, and gently stirred the coffee. "Tell me, Lao Cheng." Cheng Guojun nodded as if encouraged and said, "You know, I have a daughter named Cheng Lei, who used to work in the Donggang cultural troupe. She was laid off a few years ago, and the one who laid her off was Donggang's secretary, Chu Dongliang." Of course, Song Xiaofan still remembered Cheng Guojun's daughter, Cheng Lei. That year, after Cheng Guojun divorced his ex-wife, she went with him to the District Civil Affairs Bureau to get a marriage certificate. When they passed Donggang Elementary School, Song Xiaofan had once seen Cheng Lei. It was summer, and Cheng Guojun bought his daughter a pair of plastic sandals. Because he was busy at work and had been separated from his ex-wife and living in the factory office during that time, he had never found time to deliver them to his daughter. When they passed the elementary school, he brought the sandals to his daughter. That was the first and only time Song Xiaofan saw Cheng Lei wearing a white shirt, a black skirt uniform, and a red scarf around her neck. Unlike a 12-year-old elementary school student, she looked much more mature than her actual age. With big eyes, fair skin, and a ponytail, she looked a lot like Cheng Guojun. When she took the sandals from her father's hand, she glared at Song Xiaofan standing next to him from the corner of her eye. That gaze was cold, like a sharp knife, and Song Xiaofan couldn't help but shudder. Cheng Guojun noticed it, smiled bitterly, and said, "This child is stubborn. Since I divorced her mother, she hasn't spoken to me." At this moment, when Cheng Guojun was talking about his daughter, Song Xiaofan felt that the softest part of her heart had been touched. "Your daughter was laid off." "Lao Cheng, do you mean you want me to help her find a job at Donggang?" "That's not what I mean." Cheng Guojun shook his head and said, "My son-in-law's name is Gu Xiaolu. He used to be a cadre at Donggang. His father, who is also my in-law, Gu Jirjin, you should know him. He was an engineer from the working class and a famous model worker at Donggang. He was my mentor when I went to the factory to train with the cultural troupe. Your cultural troupe even created a performance singing about his advanced deeds." Song Xiaofan became increasingly confused as she listened. "What are you trying to say?" "It's like this. My son-in-law participated in the Donggang riot a few days ago," Cheng Guojun said. "Secretary Chu, he was the one who injured him." Song Xiaofan was surprised to hear this and said nothing for a while. She finally understood that Cheng Guojun had gone around in circles, and he was looking for her to ask her to help with this matter. "My son-in-law is currently being held in a detention center waiting for trial. Lei is so worried that she can't eat or sleep. She heard me say that you've returned to Donggang and insisted that I come to ask you for help. You and your husband are now honored guests of the province and Donggang. You have influence. If you just say a word, my son-in-law's case might be treated more leniently." Hearing Cheng Guojun's rambling and repeated words in such a humble tone, Song Xiaofan felt a mixture of emotions. No matter what, she and this man had been married for several years, and although the time was short, it was still an unforgettable period in her life. This man, who had once been a powerful figure, was now willing to put aside his pride and ask her for help after more than 20 years of separation. Whether from a moral or a rational perspective, she should help him. However, this matter involved the law and all sorts of complicated issues. Moreover, the Duku Corporation and Donggang merger project was Bai Wen's biggest headache at the moment. Song Xiaofan hesitated, feeling more conflicted than she had ever been. Just as she didn't know how to respond to Cheng Guojun, her phone rang. She looked and saw that it was her mother, Luo Yi, calling. "Xiaofan, what game are you playing? You've arrived in Dajiang but haven't come home to see your father and me?" Hearing her mother's scolding tone on the phone, Song Xiaofan was at a loss for words. Before the Spring Festival, she had talked to her mother and said that she wouldn't be able to come home for the New Year, but now she had quietly run to Donggang, which was really hard to explain. Could she put all the blame on Bai Wen? Her father had never really approved of her marriage to Bai Wen, and they still hadn't met. Fortunately, her mother had met Bai Wen once when she went to Beijing and had a good impression of him. Song Xiaofan had to bite the bullet and say, "Mom, this time I came back to Dajiang with Bai Wen. It's not for personal matters, it's for official business." "What official business? Is any official business more important than coming to wish your father and me a happy new year?" her mother angrily said. "No matter how important that chief executive Bai Wen is, he's still a son-in-law of the Song family. New Year's greetings are the most important thing during the Spring Festival. Your father told me to tell him that even in America, no son-in-law would arrive at his in-laws' doorstep without coming to wish them a happy new year." Her mother's soprano voice was sharp and bright, making Song Xiaofan's eardrums buzz. Even Cheng Guojun, sitting across from her, heard it, and an uneasy expression appeared on his face. She had no choice but to perfunctorily say to her mother, "Mom, I was originally planning to go home with Bai Wen to wish you and Dad a happy new year after Bai Wen's business is finished in the next few days. Just wait for us at home. We'll definitely be home tomorrow." After saying that, she hung up the phone. At this moment, Cheng Guojun stood up, as if he was about to say goodbye. Song Xiaofan also stood up, and the two walked together towards the hotel lobby. "Was that your mother calling just now?" Cheng Guojun asked casually. Song Xiaofan nodded. She remembered that when she had decided to marry Cheng Guojun back then, her mother had made a special trip to Donggang to find Cheng Guojun and had argued and made a scene in the factory office. If he hadn't stopped her, she would have almost been kicked out by the staff on duty. Thinking of this, Song Xiaofan couldn't help but glance at Cheng Guojun, thinking that this man still had the demeanor of a leader back then. After walking out of the lobby, Cheng Guojun stopped at the hotel's entrance, looked at Song Xiaofan, and said apologetically, "I'm really sorry to bother you after seeing you only once after so many years." Song Xiaofan pondered momentarily and said, "I'll talk to my husband about your son-in-law's matter when he returns. As for whether I can help or not, I can't say for sure." The two said a few more words and then parted ways. Song Xiaofan stood at the entrance of the hotel, watching Cheng Guojun's slightly hunched back disappear into the busy street, and remained stunned for a long time. 5. Cruel Season. One day after the Qingming Festival, the Steel City District Court publicly announced the first instance verdicts in the cases of Mao, Gu Xiaolu, and others suspected of inciting public disturbances and intentional injury. The court sentenced Mao to death and Gu Xiaolu to 3 years in prison. Gu Xiaolu stated in court that he accepted the verdict and would not appeal. Although Gu Zheng had different opinions, she felt that compared to Mao, who was sentenced to death, the court's sentence for Gu Xiaolu was already light. She saw Gu Xiaolu's wife, Cheng Lei, sitting in the audience with a very calm expression. As the defense lawyer, Gu Zheng calmly accepted the verdict. A little over a month later, Gu Zheng received the final judgment notice from the Dajiang City Intermediate People's Court in Wang Sheng's case. The appeal was rejected, and the original judgment was upheld. Gu Zheng stared at the 8 conspicuous bold characters on the judgment for a long time before she recovered. Having handled 2 cases in a row, both of which she lost, Gu Zheng felt as dejected as a frostbitten plant. She slept at home for 2 consecutive days and nights. On the morning of the 3rd day, as soon as she woke up, she remembered that Wang Sheng was to be formally imprisoned today and escorted to the labor camp to serve his sentence. His single eyelid eyes floated in her mind, and she felt a pang of sadness. She suddenly wanted to call Wang Sheng, but as soon as she took out her phone, she remembered that after a prisoner was imprisoned, their phone would also be confiscated. So, she called the clerk of the district court to ask when the court's enforcement bureau would escort Wang Sheng. The other party said, "The enforcement bureau's car left early this morning. The prisoner has probably already been escorted to the labor camp by now, right?" Hearing this, Gu Zheng regretted not going to see Wang Sheng sooner. 3 years. Could this bookworm survive in prison? And her little uncle, Gu Xiaole, she wondered if he was serving his sentence in the same labor camp as Wang Sheng. After the verdict was handed down, Gu Zheng went to see her grandparents again. The old couple's emotions were still stable. Their only concern was whether their daughter-in-law, Cheng, could wait for her son to finish his prison sentence. "I'm still hoping to hold a grandson," her grandmother said, her eyes welling up again. Gu Zheng originally wanted to talk to Cheng that day in court, but as soon as the sentencing ended, she disappeared. Cheng had come with a middle-aged man who, judging from his age and appearance, should have been her father, Cheng Guojun. Not long after, Gu Zheng received a call from Ling Shui. The two hadn't seen each other since that court hearing, and Gu Zheng hadn't been back to the law firm either. "Sister Gu, yesterday, the law firm's senior partners held a meeting and officially terminated your partnership." Ling Shu's voice was very slow and subdued, like reading an obituary. Gu Zheng was unusually calm. She had known this day would come for a long time. "Sister Gu, do you want to come to the law firm to pick up your termination documents?" "No need," Gu Zheng said faintly and hung up the phone. Hearing the beeping sound after the phone was disconnected, Gu Zheng's mind went blank. She knew that her career as a lawyer was over. A line from T.S. Eliot floated through her mind. "April is the cruelest month. As a lawyer, I sent 2 clients to prison almost simultaneously. How could it not be cruel?" Gu Zheng thought, suddenly realizing she hadn't read poetry in a long time.